Section 1 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by George Banfield. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. The end of the Fame and Fortune contest. 25 honour roll leaders in the Fame and Fortune contest of Shadowland, the motion picture magazine, and the Motion Picture Classic were invited to participate in special motion picture tests, filmed at the Roslyn, Long Island estate of Eugene V. Brewster, publisher of the three magazines. 20 young women, the pick of 100,000 contestants from all parts of the world, were present and, under the eye of Wilfred North, the well-known director, were given thorough tests. Many newspapermen and motion picture cameramen for the various news weeklies were present. The young women participating were Blanche McGarity of 236 Blum Street, San Antonio, Texas; Anitha Getwell of 1520 North LaSalle Street, Chicago; Helen Lee Worthing of 1073 Beacon Street, Boston, Massachusetts; Toots Sandell of 127 Kings Highway Park, St. Louis, Missouri; Marcia Lee of 490 Riverside Drive, New York; Anita Booth of 55 East 34th Street, New York; Bobby Dellis of 6140 Woodlawn Avenue, Chicago, Illinois; Lucille Klebold of 47 Dunn Street, Atlanta, Georgia; Vera B. Holm of 4 East 30th Street, New York; Shirley Blackshaw of 260 Laurel Street, Manchester, New Hampshire; Faye Brennan of the Hotel Harrington, Washington, D.C., Melanie Gordon of 1871 California Street, Washington, D.C., Carolyn Brooke of 918 South 16th Street, Birmingham, Alabama; Isabel and Margaret Falconer of 42 West 72nd Street, New York; Dorothy Reynolds of 244 Riverside Drive, New York; Virginia Brown of 565 West 162nd Street, New York; Ethel May Chadbourne of the Government Hotel, R.S. Building, Room 138, Washington, D.C., Evelyn Jewel Pouch of 611 Western Parkway, Louisville, Kentucky; Josephine Stadler of 548 Bainbridge Street, Brooklyn, New York. The judges are now considering the test pictures, and an official announcement will shortly be made. It is very probable that the Motion Picture Classic for November will carry the full findings of the judges. The contest is to be made an annual institution. End of Section 1.
Section 2 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Katie Johnstone. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. A bird's eye view of the screen and stage. The Footlights. The actors' strike shows no signs of a settlement as Shadowland goes to press. The war between the Actors' Equity Association and the Producing Managers Association has resulted in the closing of some 30 New York theaters and all houses in Chicago, besides affecting other cities. Vigorous efforts are being made by the playwrights to bring about peace. A new actors' organization, the Actors' Fidelity League, has appeared, fathered by the producers. The American Federation of Labor is solidly behind the equity, according to official announcements by Samuel Gompers. One of the interesting developments has been the taking over by the Actors' Equity Association of the Lexington Opera House for a season. Here all-star entertainments are being given, the biggest of the stars being Ethel and Lionel Barrymore. Ethel Barrymore has appeared in scenes from Camille and Romeo and Juliet. The Equity announces a stellar revival of The School for Scandal with John Drew, Ethel Barrymore, John Barrymore, and Lionel Barrymore. Meanwhile, 2 New York theaters are open, the Fulton with John Ferguson, and the Playhouse with At 9:45. William A. Brady, the producer of At 9:45, is playing the butler in his own melodrama. The Hippodrome opened briefly with Happy Days, but the strike closed its doors. Meanwhile, rehearsals of new productions are at a standstill, and the White Way is dark and silent, just at the time when the rush of the new season's productions is at its height. The loss due to the strike was placed at $1 million on September 1. The screen. The actors' strike has not touched the cinema, although signs are apparent, both in the East and on the coast, that the players might easily be tempted to follow the equity lead if called upon to do so. Jack Pickford has been signed by Goldwyn. This adds one more to the Goldwyn string of stars, which numbers Geraldine Farrar, Madge Kennedy, Mabel Normand, Pauline Frederick, and Tom Moore. Vivian M. Moses, former publicity director for Select Pictures, is now associated with Guy Empey in picture production. Vivian Martin has left Famous Players Lasky. Bessie Love is leaving Vitagraph. David Griffith has purchased Wild Oranges for special production. Commodore J. Stuart Blackton's productions, commencing with Dawn, will be released through Pathé Exchange, Inc. Edith Story is said to be returning to the screen with Haworth. William Farnham is doing If I Were King, Justin Huntley McCarthy's romantic drama. Farnham plays Villain, the vagabond poet. Antonio Moreno has re-signed with Vitagraph. Elsie Ferguson is going to England to do 3 productions for Famous Players Artcraft. Hugh Ford will direct. World Film has signed Jackie Saunders to star. Elsie Janis's first Selznick picture will bear the title, A Regular Girl. Constance Binney has completed her first real art production, a visualization of erstwhile Susan, Mrs. Fiskey's success with Mary Alden in the Fiskey role. End of Section 2.
Section 3 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Laurie Wilson. Shadowland, October 1919 by Various. Nazimova by Eleanor Shipley Halsey. You pass, a shadow in a land of dreams, and yet the silence of your passing seems to echo with the wild and wistful songs your people wail, in bitterness of wrongs as old as time, more sorrowful than death. But when our tears would fall like tender breath of summer wind, where northern sunlight gleams, comes laughter and the joy of ice-freed streams, that vast and deep flow forth to friendly seas. O child and woman, whom life's tragedies and joys have made a thing of cloud and fire, you are a people's pride and their desire. The strange and lovely beauty of your face, your subtlety, your strength, bespeak your race. So we, who scorn her ways, her woes despise, find hope for Russia in your steadfast eyes. End of Section 3.
Section 4 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Donald Warren. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. Section 4, My Greenwich Village, by Guido Bruno. Greenwich Village, a republic in the air, a gathering of constantly changing men and women that have a past or have a future and live in both. A gathering of people that worship the highest ideals, constantly building bridges from one illusion to another, not noticing the mud that covers the roads and that is thrown after them from all sides. Greenwich Village, refuge of saints condemned to life in the crude, hard, realistic world, you playground of sensation, thirsty women with a yellow streak, and of men that mistake the desire to sow wild oats for artistic inclination. Greenwich Village, where genius starved and gave the world the best it had, where fortunes were squandered and fortunes made, where heavens of earthly bliss prevail and tortures of hell are suffered, where night and day cease to be the regulating element of the world, where new ideas are developed into systems that will be overthrown tomorrow and substituted by others that will not live any longer. Only 6 years ago, Greenwich Village was a quiet, idyllic part of old New York. Lovers of history would come and view curiously its time-honored historical houses, squares, and burial places. Some of the oldest and most exclusive families lived in the mansions on the north side of Washington Square and its by-streets. Artists and writers had taken possession of the south side of the square. Here they lived in dilapidated dwellings used as studio buildings, a quiet life among themselves. They worked, frequented the nearby restaurants in Little Italy, unmolested by the gruesome commercialism of a New York that seemed so far away, quite outside of their own retired world. There were hardly any stores in this vicinity, the streets desolate in daytime, dead at night, and now Greenwich Village has become a strange and mysterious community. Newspapers, especially the Sunday supplements, have told you a lot about Greenwich Village, about its peculiar restaurants with bizarre colored furniture, about tea rooms where a particular sort of people assemble, the kind of humans you are accustomed to call bohemians, where impossible things are being sold in almost unreal shops. You have heard about women here wearing bobbed hair and smoking cigarettes, sitting round tables with cut tablecloths, talking of art and of matrimony and of social problems in quite a peculiar way, about men who let their hair grow long, prefer flowing neckties, and who are ever ready to serve you their theories of life, quite a tickling sensation after your family dinner in a Harlem elevator apartment. Publicity has done it all, and I have the sad honor to have brought it about. But for a French pastry cook, a proprietor of an ice cream parlor, and an Italian printer journeyman who owned a handful of type and an old-fashioned hand press, there would never have been a Bruno's garret, never a Greenwich Village Gazette, which became later Bruno's Weekly. Charles Edison, Thomas A. Edison's son, would have never come to Greenwich Village to start here his thimble theater, his dancing on Washington Square, his musicals, and New York would not have now its famous Latin quarters. Greenwich Village had never been more than a geographical conception to me, something quite different from merely an old part of the city. True, there are old quaint houses and crooked funny streets, Italian restaurants in imitation of Europe with red ink and French table d'hôte, but I could tell you at least a dozen neighborhoods in New York, and perhaps 100 in the United States, which are quite as quaint and quite as old and perhaps more picturesque than Greenwich Village. But, there is a but, and it hovers over the roofs of the houses, rustles through the leaves of the trees, and seems to form a rare and scarce patina over the stones of its graveyards and the iron of its house gates. Did you know that houses have souls, and that you who are living in steam-heated, electric-lighted elevator apartments are living in houses with dead souls? Your telephone wires pierce their hearts, your steam pipes put them upon a bed of crocuses, and your tapestries muzzled them. On bleak nights you can hear the wind moaning outside your roof, asking in vain for admission. He cannot deliver his message for neighboring souls. It is on such nights that you turn restless in your bed, listening to strange noises. You switch on your light and reopen your book which you laid away in the evening. Greenwich Village seems to be the mysterious link between the great past of the big spirits who lived here and the unknown future of those who worship them. The old-time worn houses seem to have voices which you do not hear, but which you feel if you are one of the chosen few. And then the trees in its parks will look different to you from every other tree in the world. Its old dilapidated mansions, its cottages and frame houses, now occupied by the humblest tenement population, will regain for you the bygone splendor. The deserted streets on rainy and stormy nights will bring you in close communication with the souls of men who made life worth living for everybody who can read or feel. Someone once called New York the head of the United States, and justly can Greenwich Village be called the brains of New York. Since the days of the Revolution, which gave our nation independence, until yesterday and until this very day, almost everything big and of consequence can be traced to this little community. Thomas Paine lived and died here. Edgar Allan Poe came to Greenwich Village to spend his honeymoon and to dream, to love, to starve, and to write some of the things which have made his name immortal. Mark Twain and Robert Louis Stevenson used to sit and chat on Washington Square while their housekeepers were cleaning their nearby apartments on Fifth Avenue. O. Henry spent most of his time in New York in Greenwich Village, and some of the stories that made him famous are pictures of its life. Bayard Taylor and hundreds of others lived here. Roosevelt had his headquarters on Washington Square, and Abraham Lincoln made some of his important speeches here shortly before his assassination. Genius always struggled for recognition in the boundaries of the village, and here it found its first recognition by another generation struggling similarly hard and paying its price for the laurels awarded by posterity. The Village Paper. It was in 1913. I was broke. I had come from the West, where I had sold a monthly magazine that caused my ruin for the price of a ticket to New York. My search for friends had proved futile. I used to live on Washington Square, and there I sat now on a bench with $1.50 in my pocket and a large store of ideals, ambitions, energy. I wanted to do something. There is not a lovelier place in the city than Washington Square. It carries a touch of intimacy that makes dear the boudoir of our beloved one. It has the dignity of a church and the friendliness of an innkeeper who values us as gladly sheltered guests. It was a wonderful evening, and I took in the romance of it all. All at once it came to me. Over there, the university. On the north side of the square, all the aristocratic mansions. On the south side, the aristocracy of mind in shabby lodging houses and studio buildings. Of course, this is the Fortier Latin of America. And I thought of the curious people that I knew lived in the neighborhood, how they worked, how they spent their lives in the happy solitude of creating. I made up my mind to tell the world about this strange spot in the most commercial business city on earth. I had to talk to somebody. I decided there and then I would start a paper, call it Greenwich Village, and make it a picture of the neighborhood. Quaint, most intimate, dignified, peculiar in some spots, learned here and there, but also with a ragged edge. The only shop I could see in this neighborhood was the very ice cream store, which was still opposite the terminal station of the Fifth Avenue buses. I found a very nice chap there who seemed enthusiastic about my idea of a Greenwich Village magazine. "I'm a printer," interrupted a rather rugged-looking Italian who had listened to our conversation. "I have type and an old machine. If the paper isn't too big in size, I would like to print it." I accompanied him to his shop, a little room 2x4, everything most primitive, but I had no money, and so I decided to take advantage of the offer. Next morning I went out soliciting advertisements to cover the expense of my first number. I found everybody willing to advertise in my paper. The Episcopal Methodist Church, a few Italian groceries, a real estate firm, a German bakery on 6th Avenue. Those were hard days. I helped to set the type, to print the paper, and what long, weary process it was. But finally we got it out. The first number we issued in 500 copies. I took them around to the news dealers and left them there on consignment. I lived on the floor above the ice cream parlor. The rent then was about 1/10 of what it is today. Somebody called it Bruno's Garret, and the name stuck. I rather liked the intimacy of it, and printed beneath the title page of the next issue of my paper, "Published in Bruno's Garret on Washington Square." I never thought my paper would interest others, but the old residents of Greenwich Village and its floating population of artists and writers who lived here mostly because it was cheaper than anywhere else in town. The New York Times commented on it in several columns of its news pages. The other dailies followed the lead. Soon I received a crop of letters from all over the United States requesting sample copies. All this was very encouraging, but did not enable me to pay my rent and pay for my food. The French pastry cook who kept a little shop on 4th Street was my only friend. He gave me unlimited credit, and I actually lived almost 2 months on French pastry. It was the most dreadful period of my life. I had tea and French pastry for breakfast, tarts and Napoleons, biscuits and cream rolls for lunch and for dinner. I worked from early morning till late at night, writing next week's issue from cover to cover, going about gathering advertisements and inspiration, trying to impress my advertisers with my prosperity, never asking for payment in advance, and when the money came in, I had to pay the printer, and mighty little he got, and buy paper for the next issue. About Christmas, I moved to the old house on the corner of Washington Square and Thompson Street and announced that any artist who was doing serious work could hang his pictures on exhibition in my garret free of charge. Any poet could come any Wednesday and Saturday afternoon and read his poetry to an audience that I would get for him. This was new then in New York, and artists and poets came to take advantage of my offer. In the course of 2 years and a half, I had 46 exhibitions by 46 different people, and all are now well known. Clara Tice, with her little nudes, attracted in my garret for the first time the attention of a public and for the Society for the Prevention of Vice. Bernard Wall, who recently etched a portrait of President Wilson, had his humble first exhibition here. Newspapers wrote miles of funny and serious stories about Bruno's garret. After the start of the World War, English, French, German, and Italian artists made their headquarters in the garret and attributed greatly to its cosmopolitan, independent atmosphere. The poetry readings were a great success. I printed for the first time contributions of the since universally recognized free verse poets. Alfred Cranberg's Mushrooms, as he called his unusual poetry, caused the paragraphers and columnists everywhere to post fun at my garret. My poetry readings became the rendezvous of the most fashionable people in New York, and inside of 9 months, my correspondence was brought in big mail bags. The sightseeing buses stopped in front of my old frame building, which, by the way, had been erected 150 years ago by the first public grave digger of New York, Washington Square then being Potter's Field. One day, Charlie Edison, who had patronized the garret frequently, unknown to me by name, asked me if the same things that I was doing for painters and writers couldn't be done for musicians. We formed a partnership, built Edison's Thimble Theater opposite the Brevoort Hotel, issued an appeal to all musicians and composers of America. Anyone could come and play here or sing to audiences which we got for them. There was no admission fee charged, and everybody remembers what a pretty and intimate show house the Thimble Theater is. Soon I thought of utilizing the theater for little plays. I got a small group of excellent professionals together, called them the Bruno Players, and we had memorable performances. This again being the first attempt at a small intimate theater in Greenwich Village. Unmolested by the police, we played Strindberg's Countess Julie, Seda Cohen's The State Forbids, an astonishingly free birth control play. We had Japanese actors and a play by George Bernard Shaw. Charlie Edison gave concerts on Washington Square twice a week. On 2 afternoons each week, we gathered all the children of Greenwich Village on a square and had dancing teachers arrange for them delightful open-air dances. Greenwich Village had been published fortnightly, and now it became Bruno's Weekly. Its circulation was 32,000 a week, distributed all over the United States. This happy activity had continued for almost 2 years and a half. Others came down to the village, started art galleries and art shops, tea rooms, dancing halls, bookshops, purely commercial places. A sort of Coney Island grew up almost overnight. The quiet of the village was disturbed. The sacred peace was broken. Money changers had invaded the holy ground. Slumming parties came nightly to do the village. The police had to interfere very often with the high life in basements and cellars. Artists, writers, and old residents fled as fast as they could, and then we entered into the war. More serious business called us. We had our fun, and I believe done a good deal to foster everything new in art and literature. Bruno's Weekly had given ideas to editors all over the country. The art exhibitions in Bruno's garret, which had been looked upon as freak creations of ultramodern painters, moved uptown to respectable art galleries. The garret had fulfilled its mission. Little theaters grew up everywhere, and so the Little Thimble Theater had fulfilled its mission. Charlie Edison became manager of Thomas A. Edison, Inc., and left for good. But the village flourishes today. Rents have gone sky high. Greenwich Village had established its reputation, and the undesirable elements disappeared as quickly as they had come. Here it is after the war, the gay corner of New York. Did you say you wish to tour Greenwich Village? You must come down in the evening. Then it is that village of which you dream, the background to so many big things, the essential in so many big lives. The one part of the city where you can forget the city and 7 million co-inhabitants of yours. There is the arch with its simple architecture, the monumental gateway to the square, lights here and there. High upon the tower of a hotel, an electric lighted cross, and still higher a few stars, and if you are lucky and the night is clear, the moon. And then you cross over to the other side of the square, and there are small narrow streets. The square is deserted, and only a few passengers waiting for the next bus make up the small group beneath the arc light. But the streets are peopled with men and women who stand around the Italian grocery shops and pastry bakeries. They worked all day and kept silent. Now they live their own real life. There are cafes, as you can see, on the rivas of small Italian coast cities where you really drink coffee and eat pastry and play dominoes. And then turning one of those streets, and unexpectedly, like the background of a miniature playhouse, a little chapel looms up before you. The doors are open. Candles before the altar are testimony that the saints are not forgotten. Women are sitting on the stairs selling rosaries, little statuettes, and paper flowers. Men and women and children are passing in and passing out. Following the thundering elevated, and turn again to the square. As many windows as you see lighted in these mansions of yore, used now as rooming and lodging houses, so many homes do they contain. Can you help thinking of it? If I were a poet or an artist, I surely would live here and nowhere else. But, dear reader, because of your living here, you would not be a poet or an artist. End of section 4.
Section number 5 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Natalie Fortier. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. The Complacent Comedienne, by Anne Paul. Whenever I think of Madge Kennedy as I saw her last week, I think of the word tranquility. And whenever I think of the word tranquility, then, by the same token, is the personality of Madge Kennedy suggested to me. Calm things. Fair things. A gray dove of peace in the unobtrusive sunlight. A mirrored lake, deeply blue and placidly undisturbed. The slope of the Westchester Hills, serene and beautiful. All the gentleness of life when the tempo is legato. It is not, or not the usual thing to chat with a star who is admittedly doing nothing. Just resting, proclaimed Miss Kennedy, who is essentially first, last, and all the time Mrs. Harold Bolster. It is quite an extraordinary sensation not to listen to plans for this or that, decisions, theatrical opinions, ambitions, etc., etc. Yes, it is decidedly extraordinary to talk with a star who is doing nothing at all, and who paradoxically thinks that nothing at all to do is the pleasantest sort of an occupation. Nothing by the way of work, that is. You see, she said by the way of explanation of her happy leisure, I have a one-track mind, which is a great misfortune. More versatile people can work and play at one and the same time, and therefore keep on indefinitely without serious damage to themselves. If I could go out in the evening after a long day at the studio, for instance, and dance my head off or do any silly, forgetful thing, I'd be all right, but you see, I'm just not that way. When I work, I just plain work, and I can't do one other thing. I go to the studio at 9 a.m, and I'm never even relaxed enough to be cheerfully late, work all day rather intensely, and then go home at night and go to bed so as to be ready for the next day. And I keep that up and keep it up until I snap. I snapped while I was out in California, of course, added this wife, very much in love with her husband. Mr. Bolster's being in the service may have had something to do with it. We've been separated too much as it is. But, at any rate, I just suddenly knew that I had got to stop the whole thing and not make any plans to have so much as an idea on the subject of plans. And then Mr. Bolster came out to California to get me and bring me home, and we had a wonderful, wonderful trip, and here I am. I haven't a plan, nor an idea. I don't know what I'm going to do, nor when I'm going to do it. But I do know that when I do feel ready to begin it will be with a new zest again, a new grip. I'll see things in a fresher, keener light. I'll have new ideas and a new perspective, and without these things, art, even the most consummate, becomes stale and jaded. I'm taking in all sorts of new ideas and new impressions, and getting, I hope, new illusions, and all of these will go into my work whenever I take it up again. She gave her serene little smile and patted the small, black traveling case at her side. "I'm a commuter, too," she said. "I come into town once or twice a week with my little suitcase and take home such interesting things as spices and blue lingerie ribbons and celery salt, and then I order all the things cook needs at the same time. We've taken a house at Briarcliff for the summer, a delightful place with a still more delightful view. My mother, who was with me in California, of course, and just stopped over in Chicago, is coming on soon, and we are keeping it as a surprise for her. We're seriously considering buying in the country and living there all the year round." "So that you may have a menagerie?" I asked. "No, I don't believe in domestic menageries. Dogs, for instance, one grows too fond of them, and invariably something happens to them and there is a heartbreak. I suppose it is my super-domestic attitude, but that's the way I feel about it. I did have a darling bear cub in California, but Mr. Bolster gave him to the zoo out there. He couldn't have lived here because he had to eat catalpa leaves. He was a very particular bear, an Australian one, the original of the teddy bears. We'd love to have a cow in Briarcliff, but we've no place to keep one, unless, whimsically, we bought a tent." Until one becomes accustomed to the little quizzical gleam in Miss Kennedy's gray eyes, one finds it difficult to reconcile this quiet, unassuming, gently-spoken young person with the famous comedienne of Fair and Warmer, Twin Beds, etc. But when one does get the little gleam token of real humor, the little trick of the hands, one senses the real comedy, the comedy which may be akin to tears. I asked her how she had liked Los Angeles, allowing, of course, for Mr. Bolster's enforced absence. "All but the inability to shop," she said. "One can get next to nothing there in the way of gowns and hats. Personally, I believe that clothes are an art, second almost to none, especially to people of the stage. And the whole question of clothing is whether or not you adequately express your own personality through your clothes. I have rather a difficult time doing that. I cannot wear the dashing thing of the fashionable moment. I have to be conservative in color, as well as line, and yet try to be smart as well. I have to have, simply must have, New York for that, and Collins. It is so very important that a gown be not merely becoming, but a very part, and always an unobtrusive part, of the person wearing the gown. A woman, to my way of thinking, is never well dressed unless you see her before you see what it is she has on. You must know that she looks charming, yet not know just why. It requires thought to achieve that impression, or lack of impression, and also help, skilled help, that I could not find in California. That is, in Los Angeles, I should think that the same Los Angeles might be a happy hunting ground for some artiste in the way of modes. After which we taxied to Stearns while Miss Kennedy filled up the little suitcase with pensive, pale blue lingerie ribbon and various odds and ends dear to the feminine heart. Hers is excessively feminine. She has a gentle manner, a gentle voice, gentle hands, an air of tenderness. She is most wholly and absolutely woman. She wears her art as she wears her gowns, unobtrusively. As we were parting, she said, rather dreamily, "You know, I've always wanted to do a romantic drama on the stage. Who knows?" We shook hands. Ah, I thought, the creative mood is stirring in its sleep. End of section number 5.
Section 6 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Chris Pyle. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. The World and Its Woman, by Jane Ward. The World and Its Woman related in story form from the photoplay of Thompson Buchanan, produced by Diva Pictures Incorporated for release through Goldwyn Pictures, starring Geraldine Farrar as Marcia Warren, supported by Lou Tellegren as the Prince, W. Lawson Britt as Peter Poroshin, Arthur Carew as Count Alex Vorontsov, Alex B. Francis as Prince Michael Orbeliana, Edwin J. Connolly as Robert Warren, Naomi Childers as Baroness Olga Ina Laveria, Madame Rose Dion as Irina Rodina, and Lydia Yeamans Titus as Mamie Connors. Directed by Frank Lloyd. This was before the world went mad. This was before the old gods of might and right of birth went toppling into shattered shards of clay. And on the great estates of Prince Michael Orbeliani, the peasants still labored like dumb beasts, not knowing that they had souls or kinship with God. I simply wasn't visible at all, Marcia Warren laughed. She had a generous laugh that parted her full, deeply crimson lips over strong, even white teeth. It wasn't that they snubbed me, little father. That would have implied that, humble, vile as I was, they had condescended to see me. Still, I shouldn't complain. She made a mock obeisance. Have I not been permitted to hold a dipper of water for his high and holiness? He is great in mightiness, and, little father, he has nice eyes. John Warren, a gray man with a face wrinkled as though his flesh no longer fitted his soul, looked at the fresh, glowing girlhood before him with the straining, puzzled nearsightedness of the old trying to see and understand the young. I wish, he said slowly, I wish we were back in the States. Back in old Mapleton with its Methodist ice cream festivals and its elm trees and friendliness. I wish there was some fresh-cheeked youngster, sitting on the front steps under the wisteria courting you. Russia isn't any place for young people who are just starting to live, or old people who are just about ready to stop living. A man may spend all his life in a stranger country, Marcia, but he gets homesick to die in his own land. Marcia chose to ignore the latter part of the words. I fancy Mapleton would be a tight fit for me, little father. She stretched out her young arms in a splendid free gesture. I need room, lots of room to live in. I couldn't be satisfied with tight little thoughts and neat, orderly little ideas that smell of mothballs and have been made over out of other people's views. And somehow, I don't think I could be satisfied with that fresh-cheeked youngster either. I'm rather a big person, if you know what I mean, and when I love, he will be a big man. Maybe not a very respectable man, or a good man even, but big with great splendid sins and flashes of God himself. Dread gripped him. He shook her arm. Marcia, you're speaking of someone real. Is it the young prince? Her smile was like a steady flame. It was as though a lamp were lighted in some far chamber of her soul, illuminating her. Yes, little father, proudly. It is Michael. It will always be Michael, I think. The first time I saw him, years ago when we were children, I knew somehow, with a kind of clairvoyance, that I was a woman child. No other man had ever made me feel that, little father. Oh, of course it's impossible. I knew it then, when he was only a straight, solemn boy with a kingly way of carrying his head and one small hand laid on the neck of his great hound. But I'm not going to be sorry, ever. Only glad that he's in the same world that I am, where I can see him, sometimes in the distance. I care so very much. My poor child, John Warren said brokenly. Will your wonderful, fine life be like a strain of music that is never played then? You should have had love, Marcia. You should have borne children. She touched his hand lightly. I shall sing my song, father, don't worry, she told him. And all children are not of flesh and blood. When the time comes, I shall bear my child. Late that evening, she stood in her bare little room, austere as a nun's, looking vaguely out across the great veldt, stark under the cold light of the stars. A wave of loneliness, bitter with tears, washed over her soul. A prescience of barren years of unfulfillment. Would it not, after all, be better for her if she went back to the pleasant friendliness of little places, green fields, white towns, homely, commonplace things? But even as she asked the question, she answered it, never. Should she be a coward and flee from life? Should she exchange reality, even though it was the reality of pain and hunger, for shadows of peace? I am not afraid, she challenged life. You cannot conquer me. There is nothing you can do that shall conquer me. A hesitant rap on her door was followed by her father's voice. Marcia, are you still up? A strange thing has happened. He stood in the doorway, a candle in his hands. The old prince has sent for you to come to the castle to sing to him. It seems he heard you one day as he was riding by and thought your voice was like his wife's, dead years ago. And so it happened that for the first time in her life, Marcia Warren, whose 20 years had nearly all been spent in Russia, where her father was the manager of Prince Orbeliana's oil wells, set her free-born foot over the door-sill of the nobility. She stood in the great dark hall, waiting for the prince to summon her. All about her suits of armor leered out of the shadows, vague tapestries stirred in the chill draughts, Blazoned escutcheons gleamed with crimson that was like the blood of peasant generations. In this hall, no doubt, the dark lords of the manor had dealt out life and death to their serfs, had drunk and wassailed to still the howling of the winter wolves on the white barrens. Into these dismal portals they had received the terrified maidens come to pay the ruthless lord his manor rite of their virginity upon their wedding eve. It seemed to her vivid imagining that the shadows were not cast by the great torches in their high scones, but by old ill deeds done long ago, shadows of selfishness and pride and sin. The present prince was a good man, she had heard her father say, and her heart argued for the younger Michael, and yet, who had decreed that they should be fed by others hungering, that they should dance as they were dancing now in the great ballroom, below the balcony, while the women in the village brought forth dead babies starved in the womb. She crept to the edge of the balcony and looked down with somber eyes upon the glittering scene below, the slim, scented women of the aristocrats with their silken skins and jewels, the men with curled hair and beards, brave in white and gold lace, vain of their varnished boots, blasé contemptuous of lip and glance. The glow from the chandeliers was caught up in the facets of 1,000 jewels, filling the room with darting flashes. Cold sparks of light. With a shudder, as though she looked on something loathsome, Marcia Warren, daughter of the Pilgrims, turned away. "There is a day coming," she said aloud, "when the piper will want his pay." And since the prince still delayed, in sending for her, she moved on down the hall to where, at the end through parted velvet curtains, a breath of blossoms sent out invitation. 5 minutes later she stood again in the hall, pressing her clasped hands upon the tumult of her heart. Those slender arms, very white along his shoulders, those low, broken murmurs, snatches of trembling laughter, and that kiss. Her lips felt hot and moist as though in mockery. She had been beautiful, that woman in the prince's arms, beautiful in a still marble fashion, wondrously gowned, a woman to wear sables regally, to draw the glances of the crowds. Why should she be surprised that he is to be married, she asked her heart, trying to sting it from its numbness with the lash of scorn. It is the nature of a man to mate with his kind, an aristocrat with aristocracy. What is it to you who he holds against his heart, whose lips he crushes? Why do you, O God? She pressed her teeth upon her lower lips and closed her eyes, but even behind the lowered lids she could see them as she had seen them a moment ago, as she would see them through sleepless nights to come. The strong, noble face that she had hung like an icon in the shrine of her heart, bent over the icy beauty of Olga, Baroness of Breslov, pressing upon the perfect lips a kiss that shook her, watching it. She scarcely was aware of what she did until she stood in the dim-lit library before the frail old figure, sunken in its velvet chair, and began to sing. Then out of the agony and travail of her heart came forth a song. The dusk throbbed to its world passion, world pain. The notes were like silver ingots hot from the crucible, molten in the fires of the soul. When the last echo had quivered into silence, the old prince lifted his frosted head and looked keenly at the young, spent face among the shadows. "You are a great singer, my child," he told her gently. "Some day the world shall crown you with a crown beside which our coronets will be worthless as straw." These words were to come back to her years later, as she stood in the wings of the great opera at Petrograd, waiting to make her first appearance as prima donna, years in which she toiled until she was spent in body and soul over tedious exercises, struggling to put aside her grieving for her father's death, and that other grief, which mercifully grew gentler with the years until she was almost able to think of Michael as one who had died very long ago. As she stood in the jeweled gown of Thais, the glare of the footlights revealed a figure rounded into gracious womanhood, a face serene and thoughtful with a beauty that was more than physical. If the dusky fullness of the lips, the hollows of the throat, the curving breasts cried to the beholder, "I am made for the sweet offices of love," the low forehead and dark eyes, disdainful of coquetry, said gravely, "I am made for thought." "She's beautiful, isn't she?" whispered one girl of the ballet to another, looking toward the still, white figure. "They say she hasn't any lovers, but I can't believe that." "I've heard that she is a revolutionist," the other muttered. "My seamstress told me. She is as Peter Porcine. The Red Leader is mad about her." "Ah, there goes her cue. Do you suppose she's frightened? Just think, the house is filled with titles tonight, a cousin to the Tsar in one of the boxes." Beyond the footlights a blur, a murmur, as she stood before them so different in her nun-like purity from the other prima donnas, fleshy, stereotyped, corseted. A blur in one face leaping to her eyes out of the thousands turned to her, and in one cosmic moment all her hard-won peace was gone. He was sitting in one of the boxes with his wife and another man with glossy, brilliantined beard and long, restless white hands. He leaned a little forward, and she thought he made an involuntary sign of recognition, as though his soul had greeted a kindred soul. And suddenly her spirit was caught up in a great surge of joy, and she began to sing. The papers of the next morning were full of the sensational success of the young American singer, but the club rooms and tea tables buzzed with another tale. Prince Michael had at last succumbed. He had gone straight from his box to the singer's dressing room. He had remained with her 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, according to the imagination of the raconteur. He had already established her in an apartment on the Mall. He had been repulsed. He hadn't been repulsed. What luck for her! A prince of the royal blood. Handsome as a young god, too, and quite free to love whom he chose, for didn't the whole world know of his wife's disgraceful affair with Count Otto? And after all, she might be charming and have a golden voice and all that, but my dear, she was only an American, a nobody at all. And while the wiseacres wagged industrious tongues, Marcia Warren was living in a world apart. A little world with only 2 inhabitants, a little world as small as the heart of a woman, yet touching the nethermost stars. For Prince Michael had told her that he loved her, told her with a trace of the aristocrat in his voice, but with truth in his eyes, and that night, when she knelt after her old child fashion to say the childhood prayers, she thanked God very earnestly that this thing had come to her, to remember when she be old. For with rather remarkable innocence, she did not understand what Michael wanted of her, and in strange awe of that innocence that made a sort of sanctuary about her like a nun's robes, he did not enlighten her until there came a moment when her nearness and his man-need of her flung aside all scruples, and he took her into his arms and kissed her wide, grave eyes shut, and her lips into a crimson flower. Then, feeling her tremble, he set her down, and they faced each other across the memory of that stolen, heady moment of joy. "Marcia, I want you. I must have you," Michael said hoarsely like a tragic boy. "After that kiss, dear, we belong to each other. What do conventions matter? What does anything matter before that? I want you as I never wanted woman before, for I love you as I never loved a woman." "Your wife," Marcia said steadily, and touched his hand gently in mother pity for him, forgetting her own pain. "Then, even if that barrier were gone, we could never marry, you an aristocrat, I a woman of the people. Are you asking me to be your mistress, Michael?" "I am asking you to be my love," he said bitterly, for he saw that he had lost the battle. "You cannot love me if you will let a word stand between." "It is a world that stands between us," she corrected, "and the world will have to fall into ruin and be made new again before I can come to you openly in the sun with God looking on." "Then the world will fall into ruins," Prince Michael cried passionately, "for the turning of the night into the day is not more certain than that you and I shall one day come together. It was written so before the stars were made." It was only the first of many sieges he laid to her resolution, but she steadily refused, sensing that there was much of the dross of self in his love, holding her own as too high and holy a thing for profanation. Even when his wife openly confessed the shame of their marriage by leaving Petrograd with Count Otto, of the glossy beard and white hands, she refused to encourage a divorce. "Marriage with me would outcast you, beggar you, and in the eyes of your church and of the world, it would be no true marriage," she said wearily, and when he forgot caution and told her baldly what the world whispered of them, she only smiled a little quivering smile. "We know the truth," she told him. "Oh, my prince, can't you see that I am trying to protect our love? It is all I have had of life, all I shall ever have." For she did not believe in miracles, and only a miracle could clear away the barriers between. Even when the storm clouds of the Revolution began to gather, it did not occur to her that here might be solution. In her early days in Petrograd, when she had been a struggling student, she had allied herself with the young radicals of the student quarter, drawn to them by her innate love of democracy and sturdy American detestation of class privilege. Even after she became an opera idol, she kept up this connection, and now suddenly she found herself at the heart of the storm. The poor feeble puppet czar came tumbling down from his painted throne. The aristocrats and rulers were flung into the prisons they had so often filled, or fled from the city to crouch in hiding from the despised peasants. Red anarchy stalked through the streets of Petrograd, leaving its bloody footprints broadcast on the pavements, touching its torch in grisly mischief to the roofs of stately palaces. Prince Michael Orbeliani, already more than half a Democrat at heart, left the city for his estates in the Caucasus to deal with his peasants single-handed, and Marcia Warren, sick at soul, remained in her beautiful apartment in the city, from the windows of which she saw sights that drained the blood from her cheeks, Nothing in the few months of her love time had been so hard for her as the thought that she could not share his danger with him. She had been strong enough to refuse happiness, but her courage quailed and faltered at refusing to suffer with him. She was sitting at her piano, touching the keys with listless fingers one morning when Peter Poroshin, the Red Leader, made his way in, contemptuous of doorbells of ceremony. He was a great, coarse-featured brute of a man with thick, squat hands, covered with red hairs and a kind of animal odor about him. She shuddered instinctively under the covetousness of his look, though she tried to speak with the old friendliness. But he waved her words aside, laughing with a queer, sidewise laugh that exposed yellow fangs. "This is a busy time. Let's to business." She saw that he was drunk with his new power. "We revolutionists are choosing our women before we turn them over to the state. I might have a damned haughty aristocrat if I chose, but no. You knew years ago that I was mad about you, Marcia, but you were after bigger game then. Now there isn't anyone bigger than I am, and I've come for you." He saw her recoil, and anger thickened his coarse face with blood. He caught at her shoulder with a snarl. "So we're putting on the airs of a cursed aristocrat since we have had a prince to kiss us." He thrust his bestial face forward. "Well, all I need to do is say the word, tell my merry friends out there that you're a friend of the nobility, and there'll be a hemp necklace around that pretty neck in a jiffy." She faced him, head proudly high. "You can't frighten me, Peter Poroshin," she told him. "I would welcome death rather than give myself to you." He could have taken her then and there, but her clear gaze cowed him. He turned his anger into another channel. "I can tell you a piece of news, Madam High and Mighty, that will take you down a peg, perhaps. Your damned prince has returned to town." Now, indeed, she quivered, as though his words had been blows. "No, that's a lie to frighten me. How do you know? Where is he?" Poroshin laughed savagely. "Oh, he was seen all right by one of our spies. He had on the revolutionary uniform, and he's at his old rooms now. But in half an hour he'll be safe, in hell. And then, my Lady Disdain, I'll attend to you." He flung open the door, calling outside, "Feta, come here, my pretty chicken." The woman that entered was a veritable giantess with hands like hams and a bristly mustache that gave her dull face a fierce aspect. Poroshin pointed to the stricken Marcia. "There's the girl. Guard her well now, if you prize your worthless life, and I'll return in an hour or so." The door crashed to across his words. Marcia sprang to her feet, flung herself at the door, and felt her arms seized in the grip of iron. The hag laughed shrilly. She was evidently half-witted, but bright enough for Poroshin's purposes. Looking up into the hideous face, maddened by the slow ticking of the clock in the corner, telling away the moments of her lover's life, Marcia struck, with all the power of her frenzy, straight into the woman's eyes. In an uncanny silence they rolled upon the floor, tearing at one another with their bare fingers, struggling for a throat-hold. The blood from a dozen scratches filled Marcia's eyes, wet her lips. She was suddenly filled with a kind of animal fury, the woman creature fighting for her mate. Only half the other side, she somehow found herself kneeling upon her broad, muscular chest, and tying her arms close to her sides with the silken sash of the morning gown flung across a nearby chair, then dragging the snarling but helpless bulk into a corner, where her shouts would not be heard, she sprang to the door and flung it wide. How she made her way to her lover's room she could never remember afterward, only a vague impression of wild faces, the sharp pain of her panting lungs, a half-remembrance of a man with kind eyes who had given her a ride in his automobile for part of the way, stairs that seemed to be as high and steep as mountains, a doorknob that would not turn in her nerveless fingers, and at last, Michael, haggard and unshaven, in strange, mud-splotched garments, staring at her wild appearance with startled eyes. A word told her errand. She clung to him, faint with dread. "What shall we do?" he said hopelessly. "I have no friends who would hide us, and if they take you, God forbid, we had better die together here and now." "Wait," she bade him. "There is one place where they would never think of looking for you, and that is my rooms. He will not return there until he has found you, and in the meantime we can think, can plan. Come, we must go quickly, or we'll be too late." Another furtive journey through the maddened streets, and they were back in Marcia's room. In the stress of the moment she forgot the woman she had left behind the portieres. She clung to Michael. "Safe," she whispered. "Oh, thank heaven." But she had not counted on their enemy. Even as she spoke, heavy footsteps grated in the corridor outside, and Peter Poroshin stood before them, laughing triumphantly over folded arms. "You were not very flattering, Marcia, when you rated me for a fool," he chuckled. "I put myself in your place, and the rest was simple. I rejoice to see, your highness," he made a derisive bow, "that you have no weapon. It simplifies matters. He prolonged his triumph, savoring it enjoyingly. "And now, Marcia, what have you to say to the little proposition I made to you an hour ago?" Michael took a step forward, furious. "I'll be damned if you—" Out of the dark corner moved a giant figure, taking from the table as it passed something long and slender that gleamed. Marcia alone saw her, and the moan of despair on her lips halted in sheer surprise. The slender thing that glittered like steel rose in the air and descended into Peter Poroshine's heart. "He was cruel to me. I hated him," the hag gurgled, and fell on her knees, crawling across the carpet to touch the girl's skirt with reverent fingers. Michael felt Marcia's shudder against him. No longer the leader, the protectress, but a woman with a woman's need of being sheltered and loved. He took her hands in his great clasp. "Marcia, look at me, my dearest. There is no barrier between us any longer. I had meant to tell you. The peasants burned Ott's castle, and he and she perished in the flames. I am not a prince now, only a man who needs his woman. Marcia, come with me, woman God made for me." "Whither thou goest, my lord," Marcia said with a great gladness, "I will go." End of section 6.
Section 7 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alan Dixon. Shadowland, October 1919. By Various. Painting in a Sedan car. Painting in a sedan car. Last winter, while motoring on Long Island, I spied in a distance, near a little frozen stream, a few sticks and a bundle of clothing, and as we came nearer, observed that the sticks were an easel, and the bundle of clothes was an artist. His feet were deep in the snow, his hands were covered with heavy cloth gloves, and on his shivering knees rested a box of colors. In his fist he held a brush, and we could see little clouds of mist every time he breathed. "Poor fellow," sighed my companion. "Some poor artist. What a hard life. Why, that's worse than a day laborer's lot." Many times after that I had the occasion to note the hardships of the outdoor painter, and particularly last March. The month had come in like a lion and was not going out like a lamb. Twice my easel blew down. Once, canvas and all, with the buttered side down. I had then hung a large rock from the easel, which settled one problem, but I could find no solution to the problem of how to prevent my palette from imitating an unreefed sail in a three-reef breeze. And that young March gale seemed to pick out the most inopportune time for hurling a gust at my right hand just as I was about to paint a slender branch of a tree, which produced a trunk where a twig should be. On another occasion, I started out early one crisp November morning. The sun was trying to break through some thick clouds, and the frost made everything sparkle with color. Walking down a farm lane through the meadow, I came upon a dandy scene that I started to paint. It was marshy and wet, and my boots broke through the frozen crust into the mire. Then it began to rain, and my sketch became more of a watercolor than an oil. My feet were already wet, but I stuck it out and got a pretty fair sketch, but it cost me a bad cold. After that, I began to think, why was it that artists have to work under such difficulties and discomforts? And why need they waste so much time making preparations and waiting for proper conditions? I remembered the old saying, "For every evil beneath the sun, there is a remedy or there's none. If there is one, try and find it. If there is none, never mind it." I had heard that Bruce Crane, Leonard Ochtman, Charles Group, and others had used such devices as moving vans, farm trucks, tents, and peddlers' wagons for movable studios, and that these were rented of farmers or anyone around who possessed anything on wheels. I had also heard that some artists combined carpentership with art and builded for themselves temporary shacks near the scenes that they had selected to paint and then awaited the proper atmospheric conditions. But I believe there is a better plan, and here it is. It so happened, last spring when I exchanged my last year's touring car for a new one, I decided to buy a sedan. I figured that a convertible sedan had all the advantages of a touring car and none of the disadvantages. With all the windows down and side posts removed, It was practically a touring car, and in a few moments it could be converted into a completely closed car, suitable for town use in winter or for rainy or dusty weather in summer. A sedan is completely enclosed in glass. Mine is a 7-passenger, with plenty of room for carrying large frame paintings, easels, canvases, sketchbox, etc. And hence, it has become my portable studio, easily and rapidly moved from place to place. Archimedes discovered the law of specific gravity while taking a bath in his tub. Sir Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravitation by observing an apple fall from the tree. And James Watt invented the steam engine by watching the lid of his mother's tea kettle rise and fall with the escaping steam. And your humble servant invented painting in a sedan car, compared with which the aforesaid inventions pale into insignificance, and just because he knew enough to come in out of the rain. There's plenty of room in a sedan car to place your easel in front of the rear seat. On a little folding stool under the easel, I place my paint box. On the seat beside me, I have ample room for tobacco box, pipe, ashtray, paint rags, luncheon, and canvases. The scene I am to paint can be seen from either of 3 directions. In fact, you can paint 3 different pictures without leaving your comfortable seat or moving your car. Many a full day have I spent on the very same spot, making as many as 3 sketches or studies. In winter, I have an oil stove standing on the floor of the car alongside my easel, which, of course, I do not keep lighted when the car is in motion. In summer, I paint in my sedan when wind or sun outside are bothersome. In the early spring, I paint in my sedan to avoid the damp ground and high winds. So, you see, the sedan is a cure for all ills that artist flesh is heir to, including heat, cold, dust, rain, and wind. Some wag has said that laziness is the mother of invention. That may be so, and I will not deny that my invention is conducive to laziness, but I assert in all seriousness that there is nothing in this life quite so agreeable, comfortable, and inspiring as painting in a sedan car. The Painter. End of Section 7.
Section 8 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Great Actors' War by Louis Raymond Reid. Just as the first week of August 1914 has gone down in the history of the world as marking the beginning of the greatest war of mankind, so the first week of August 1919 will record the occasion of the greatest conflict in the history of the stage. For many years the clouds of war have been gathering upon the theatrical horizon, but they were lightly regarded. Actors might organize, it was confidently stated in theatrical circles, and be eventually affiliated with federated labor, but there would never be any real hostility between them and the managers, because the latter held the purse strings, and the actors, tradition had it, would never stick together. And then, with a suddenness which bore a remarkable similarity to that which marked the beginning of the world conflict, the actor-manager war broke out. The Battle of Broadway was on, and before a week had been passed, it threatened to extend throughout the nation and part of Canada. While no acts of violence, no atrocities have been resorted to, testifying anew to the gentlemanly character of the forces on each side, friendships by the score have been broken, millions of dollars have been lost or sacrificed, bitter accusations and recriminations have been passed back and forth, lawsuits by the dozens have been instituted, daily communiques have been published, strategic maneuvers to win the support of the public have begun on each side. Indeed, every device known to warfare, except actual destruction of life and property, has been called into use by the powerful forces in conflict. It is the greatest sensation that has ever been recorded in the theatrical world, paling into insignificance, that struggle many years ago between the Syndicate, a group of managers dominating the activities of the stage, and which consisted mainly of Claw and Erlanger, Charles Frohman, Rich and Harris and Elf Heyman, and the Independents, who were seeking to break down the monopoly and who comprised, among others, such managers as the Messrs. Schubert, David Belasco, and Harrison Gray Fisk. At that time, it was solely a fight of managers against managers. The actor was an interested onlooker, inasmuch as his services were being sought by each side at remarkably lucrative salaries. His traditional dignity was supposed to shield him from the abuse and bad feelings of a managerial controversy. He was first and last an artist, supremely indifferent to questions of contracts and other affairs of business. With the passing of time, however, the actor began to take a keener and keener interest in his relations with his managers. He began to see and appreciate the practicality of organization as an effectual protection of his rights, and it was in this appreciation that may be observed the spirit which led to the crisis which confronts the theater today. Actors not only organized, but they stuck together in a campaign for principles which they believed just, and when they could not win by what they termed moral suasion, they struck. And they struck with all the picturesqueness and dramatic instinct of which their natures were capable. They held mass meetings at their headquarters and in hotels, at which emotion characteristically ran high. They paraded the streets in motor cars and afoot, enlisting the aid of public opinion. They held a pretentious parade which was marshaled with that fine and peculiar feeling for electrifying effects as are associated with stage presentations. They obtained a theater wherein they could attract patronage that would aid their strike fund. They picketed with zeal, though not with considerable originality, those theaters against which they had declared a ban. They established offices in various restaurants and hotels for the purpose of conducting their multifarious activities in connection with the strike. And while the actors were busy, the managers planned their campaign with enterprise and adroitness. They also had their organization, headed by the alert and resourceful firm of Cohen and Harris, and upon the advice of shrewd lawyers, they proceeded to harass their opponents with elaborate lawsuits and with the assembling of strike-breaking casts. They recognized the value of propaganda, and possessing great wealth at their command, printed large advertisements in the press stating their side of the case. They instituted a large press bureau, with two of the most able publicity men of their theater in charge, and they appreciated the moral value of wholesale resignations from actors' clubs in gaining defections from the ranks of their opponents. Supreme confidence reigned on each side. Each side was convinced of the justice of its stand and of its ability to win, and the public, at first amused by something really new under the sun, became increasingly confused by the charges and countercharges, the changes in the theatrical map, the different incidents that were headlined daily in the press. But interest never waned. Whether the strike lasts a fortnight or 6 months, widespread disaster will have been effected in the theatrical world, a result which will be observed for many seasons to come. After all, it is simply another phase of the age-long struggle between capital and labor. Perhaps it will inspire a great playwright, a Galsworthy, to write a new strife, in which the issue will be settled, but perhaps that is hoping too much. Perhaps it would be best to let the public decide the issue. After all, it is the public which pays, and pays, and pays. End of Section 8. Read by Adam Smith, Sutherland, Virginia, March 6, 2024.
Section 9 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by cmensch. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. The Albin Marbles. Not so long ago, the painter handed us an art proof of Naomi the Greek, as we thought an excellent copy of some fine old Greek fragment. This was our first view of the Albin Marble camera studies. Being of an investigative turn of mind, we sought out their creator. I have sought for over 20 years, Mr. Albin said, to make the camera as elastic a medium for personal expression as even paint and canvas. The marbles are straight photographs direct from life, but rather more or less a stunt, and not to be confounded with pictorial photography as an art. I came across the gem of it during research at work. After constant experimentation, I secured a print of a lovely nude, which I handed to a friend, a famous sculptor. Quite unsuspecting, he marveled at the delicate modeling, fascinated by the uncanny realism of the statue, and after close scrutiny declared the sculpture to be a genius. Right there, I knew I had won, for, as I have said, the print was a photograph direct from life, without any preparation of the model whatsoever, with whitening or any of those sickly whitewash, imitation plaster cast stuffs. Fake, of course, but since it has made possible a few things worthwhile, I suppose it will be forgiven. The day will come, and soon, when money will be spent to secure art, directors who are first artists and less on the conglomerate abominations of junk and fake architectures, astounded but quite senseless. Just wait and watch for the frantic and pathetic imitations of that masterpiece, Broken Blossoms. As for the nude on the screen or in still photography, yes and no. Hitherto, on the screen, it has been so disgustingly, inexcusably naked. Thank God the public has so completely damned it. Some day an artist will produce a thing of sheer beauty, nude but not naked. Possibly the Marbles may provide a means of preserving unto posterity records of such lovely figures as possessed by many a stage and screen beauty. The process of the Albin Marbles is so involved as to be difficult to patent, and must therefore remain the secret of one man. End of section 9.
Section 10 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Brian Henson. Shadowland, October 1919, by Heywood Broun. Peaks Among Books. The best novel of the year has been written by a playwright. No book of the season has received such enthusiastic notices as Somerset Maugham's The Moon and Sixpence. Maugham is well known here and in England as a playwright, for he has furnished light vehicles for John Drew, Billy Burke, Margaret Anglin, and a number of American stars. As a novelist, his following is not nearly as numerous, although Of Human Bondage was hailed by a small group as a remarkable achievement. There is the slightest of relationships between Maugham the playwright and Maugham the novelist. His plays are the veriest fluff, while his books are all of the most serious intent. The difference is marked even in the titles. When Maugham writes a play, he calls it Smith or Penelope or Mrs. Dot or something else which suggests that it will do for the tired businessman who has been unable to get first-row seats for the musical comedy. And the plays invariably make good the mood suggested by the title. But with books, Maugham is quite a different person. The Moon and Sixpence, for instance, offered a problem even before it was read because nobody except Maugham knew what it meant. He agreed at length, however, to let his readers into the secret and explained that, when he was a boy, his nurse used to tell him of a very foolish man who was so eager to find the moon that he overlooked a sixpence which lay at his feet. Grown to man's estate, Maugham says that the moral of the story has lost savor with him, for he thinks that perhaps there is more wisdom in looking for the moon than in stooping for sixpence. However, the hero of the new Maugham book does something more than overlook the sixpence. As a matter of fact, he fairly grinds it under his heel in his quest for the moon. This hero is an Englishman named Strickland, who, at the age of 40, suddenly decides to go to Paris and become an artist. He deserts his wife and his 2 children and leaves a curt note saying that he is not coming back. Of course, his wife and all his friends believe that an affair with some woman or other is at the bottom of his strange behavior. A friend of the family is sent to Paris to intercede with him and discovers to his surprise that there is no woman in the case and that Strickland actually has gone to Paris to become an artist. The emissary from the family tries to convince Strickland that he is a fool to attempt to take up a new career so late in life, since he has almost no chance of obtaining anything more than a third or fourth-rate success. But Strickland has no patience with this line of reasoning. "I tell you I've got to paint," he explains. "I can't help myself. When a man falls into the water, it doesn't matter how he swims, well or badly. He's got to get out or he'll drown." And Strickland sticks to his art and becomes a great painter, although his genius is not recognized until after his death. The book is striking because it goes squarely against the Anglo-Saxon tradition that love or sex attraction is the one definite dynamic force in life. Certainly American patrons of the theater, the screen, and the novel have learned to expect stories in which men win battles, build railroads, write operas, or stop drinking for the sake of a woman's smile. Strickland is different. His interest in women is merely incidental. It is physical and transient. "I don't want love," he says. "I haven't time for it. It's weakness. I am a man, and sometimes I want a woman. When I've satisfied my passion, I'm ready for other things. I can't overcome my desire, but I hate it. It imprisons my spirit. I look forward to the time when I shall be free from all desire and can give myself without hindrance to my work. Because women can do nothing but love, they've given it a ridiculous importance. They want to persuade us that it's the whole of life. It's an insignificant part. I know lust. That's normal and healthy. Love is a disease. Women are the instruments of my pleasure. I have no patience with their claim to be helpmates, partners, companions." Strickland lives up to this creed and is absolutely ruthless in all his human relationships. He allows no affection, no friendship, even to come between him and his art. To be sure, other novelists have written about geniuses who were thoroughgoing egoists, but Maugham is extraordinarily successful in his portrait because he succeeds in convincing the reader that the man is authentically great. This effect is gained by a number of effective devices. First of all, he gives us only a few glimpses of the man's work, but these are so vivid that we are encouraged to go on and complete the survey in our minds. Also, he is careful never to let Strickland himself make any claims to greatness. The man is not allowed even to attempt to explain his work. He is pictured as frankly contemptuous and indifferent to what people think of him. He is not even anxious for recognition by posterity. Strickland paints simply to please himself, and when he is done with a picture, he loses all interest in it. This is an egoism so colossal that it is disarming. Only one character in the book is allowed to realize completely the greatness of the artist. All the rest are skeptical. In other words, the reader is allowed to become, in his own right, one of the discoverers of Strickland, which serves to bind him much more securely than if the writer had said at the beginning of the book, "Now I tell you this man is a great artist, and that's all there is to it. You must accept my judgment in the matter." Maugham is too shrewd for that. He tells the story throughout in the first person, using various characters to give varying points of view about Strickland. But the chief storyteller is one of the chief skeptics. The fullest report which he gives on the art of Strickland is as follows. "I will not describe the pictures that Strickland showed me. Descriptions of pictures are always dull. and these, besides, are familiar to all who take an interest in such things. Now that his influence has so enormously affected modern painting, now that others have charted the country which he was among the first to explore, Strickland's pictures, seen for the first time, would find the mind more prepared for them. But it must be remembered that I had never seen anything of the sort. First of all, I was taken aback by what seemed to me the clumsiness of his technique. Accustomed to the drawings of the old masters, and convinced that Ingres was the greatest draftsman of recent times, I thought that Strickland drew very badly. I knew nothing of the simplifications at which he aimed. I remember a still life of oranges on a plate, and I was bothered because the plate was not round, and the oranges were lopsided. The portraits were a little larger than life-size, and this gave them an ungainly look. To my eyes, the faces looked like caricatures. They were painted in a way that was entirely new to me. The landscapes puzzled me even more. There were 2 or 3 pictures of the forest at Fontainebleau, and several of streets in Paris. My first feeling was that they might have been painted by a drunken cab driver. I was perfectly bewildered. The color seemed to me extraordinarily crude. It passed through my mind that the whole thing was a stupendous, incomprehensible farce. Naturally enough, the reader will align himself on the other side and say, "Why, the simpleton doesn't know a great artist when he sees one." At least that was our attitude, and we almost felt like a successful art critic when we read how people came forward to bid for Strickland's canvases after his death. The book takes Strickland from Paris to Tahiti, where he comes to an obscure and fearful death. But throughout, Mom has managed to show a glint of spirit, however harsh and selfish, struggling toward an idealistic goal. Mingled with the praise of the book, there has been some comment that the novel is immoral, since Strickland's conduct throughout is strictly antisocial. But after all, the book lays down a course for life for geniuses only, which will not affect the morals of most of us. More than that, it seems to us that Mom has maintained an impartial attitude throughout. He neither attacks Strickland nor defends him. He merely presents him and leaves the rest to the readers. But though The Moon and Sixpence is perhaps a more engrossing and unusual novel than Saint's Progress, Mom can hardly challenge Galsworthy's position as the great neutral among novelists. Perhaps it would be fair to make the title include playwrights, for everybody remembers Strike as the most perfect example of even-handed justice which a playwright ever bestowed on warring characters. Saint's Progress is a beautiful piece of work. Every character has his due, but in spite of the impartiality of the book, there is no lack of passion. Certain scenes are emotionalized to a point where they all but hurt. The story concerns a clergyman who tries to meet all the various war problems, particularly the changes in sex morality, with the formula of the Church of England. In the novel, the formula proves inadequate, but Galsworthy does not commit himself as to whether the fault lies with the formula or with the folk who disown it. We found Saint's Progress a singularly moving story, and an engrossing one, though it is by no means crowded with incident. And yet we hankered sometimes to have Galsworthy choose between his characters and say, this one is right, and this one, for all his logical talk, is wrong. But when we wrote that there were times when his impartiality made one want to shout, "Don't be so damn fair. Pick a side. Take off your coat and get in it." Keith Preston of Chicago countered by remarking that, on the other hand, he always felt like advising the excitable Wells to keep your shirt on. Certainly Wells has never become quite so much wrought up about anything as religion. His work, whether better or worse, is much more intense since he discovered God the Invisible King. The Undying Fire is among the most vehement of his books. Galsworthy may remain in doubt as to a religious formula for the problems of the day, but not so Wells. He has a faith to meet all facts, and he has small patience for skeptics. In The Undying Fire, he by no means plays fair, for all the characters whom he sets up as opponents of his theories are so broadly burlesqued that they are hardly capable of giving an effective battle. As a result, all the good talk goes to the character who acts as the mouthpiece of Wells. The book has the merit, however, of great eloquence. Though it is mostly talk, it is talk of a surprisingly brilliant sort. The plot is the merest formula, for Wells has taken the story of Job and used it as the framework for a modern story. There is very little evidence that he is interested in what his characters do, but plenty to prove that he does care what they say. Another brilliant partisan in the literary field is Blasco Ibáñez. He is less interested in talk than Wells, for he traces not so much the careers of individuals as man in the mass. La Bodega, for instance, is a fine, colorful, passionate story of social revolution in Spain. It is also a book of propaganda for prohibition, but this is incidental. Blasco Ibáñez thinks that red revolution will come only when the peasants of Spain are no longer distracted by red wine. Leonard Merrick is on the high side of a revival which has brought back to the reading public his Conrad in Quest of His Youth, one of the most pleasant defenses of philandering ever written. Merrick grows as moral as many another literary preacher in The Actor-Manager and The Position of Peggy Harper, but Conrad in Quest of His Youth is a gay flight with all the moral ballast left in the hangar. Joseph Conrad has gained even more popularity than usual with his flaming romance, The Arrow of Gold, in which he has discarded his usual literary device of beginning on the roof and working down to the cellar and then back to the roof again. This tale begins at the beginning and goes straight on to the end. E.V. Sackville West has won a high position for herself with a first novel called Heritage, which has a fine feeling for the sight and sound and smell of things. Another book which gives us much of the influence of external things on man is John Walter Byrd's The Born Fool. Of the nonfiction books of the last few months, the most amusing which we have read is Set Down in Malice by Gerald Cumberland. In this, a young English journalist writes all the things about his literary acquaintances which nobody should tell and which everybody wants to know. End of section 10. Read by Brian Henson, Modesto, California, June 5th, 2024.
Section 11 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by yunilis. Shadowland, October 1919 by Various. The Influence of the Screen by Madame Olga Petrova. There is probably no greater influence today in the life of the proletariat than the influence of the screen. This influence has grown from the wonderment expressed by a handful of spectators in the first improvised picture theater, at the fact that photographs could move, from an apparently lived to the influence that, but a few months ago, caused many to forsake simple and peaceful modes of a life to wage bitter and unrelenting war against the common enemy of our latter-day civilization. Of course, there are those who still lift a pitying eyebrow at the moving picture in general and an incredulous one, and any influence it may have in particular. With this, we are not directly concerned, but with the thousands who fill the picture theaters from the north to the south and from the east to the west, we are very closely and certainly concerned indeed. One is continually told that the audience goes to the theater to be amused and not to think. Never was statement more stupid and paradoxical than this. Every person, unless he be imbecile, intoxicated, or otherwise mentally comatose, thinks consciously or subconsciously, just as he breathes consciously or subconsciously. It is the quality of a thought he thinks that is the open and variable quantity. It is the thought suggested to the onlooker by the happenings on the screen that engenders the influence which may react to his benefit or to his harm. As to what is amusing. One man's fish was ever another man's poison, and while one woman feels that she has not spent a profitable quarter unless she weeps copiously, another rolls her eyes ecstatically over the wooings of Mr. Douglas Fairbanks. Another remark that one hears continually whenever the influence of the screen for harm is mooted is the remark that people are perfectly well able to judge for themselves whether it's good or not good for them, without the interference of a self-appointed benefactor of the public morals. That the discrimination of the last-mentioned individual may be of a questionable variety goes without saying, but the necessity for the same discrimination is apparent. For the same reason that we have religious advisors, medical advisors, legal advisors, and so on. If the quality of a thought appreciated and accepted by the mob were by nature of such soundness, from a personal or communistic standpoint that gardens were unnecessary, then the jail and the church, the school and the reformatory would disappear automatically, and the towers and the minarets of Utopia would reflect the whiteness of a hitherto unsuspected dawn. The mess is fed, therefore, upon faith which is more or less prodigated by the school and the church, not to mention the mother of the newspaper, and last but by no means least by the screen. Now thinking being one thing, and reasoning a horse of quite another color, the mass forms its conclusions for the greater part by just such artificial processes as this, taking them on surface values. To expect that some as to reason this copyright maxims pro or con would be to expect a miracle. I once heard a person say, "Show me what newspaper a man reads, and I will tell you his political opinions." That remark might be translated for the screen. Show me which artist pictures a person most frequently sees, and I will tell you that person's general outlook on life. This statement may sound broad, but to one who receives, as man, personal letters as I do, both on the subjects of my own plays and the plays of other artists as well, it underestimates rather than exaggerates the truth. I have found that the bulk of these letters take for gospel that which they see upon the screen and are powerfully affected thereby. This being the case, it behooves those who have the responsibility of guarding the public mind, pictorially speaking, to see to it that their mind shall be given such quality of a thought that shall not lead it to a lesser state of grace. For instance, while one admits that sex and crime have their place in art and on the screen, one would make it a sine qua non that if lapses from certain laws are to be made the basis for screen amusement, call it what you will, the offenders must be brought to face the inevitable consequences of their wrongdoing. These consequences should be shown in as great detail as the offense, so that the criminal may not be hysterically proclaimed a hero or a martyr, or the Pyle publico as a sweet godless young thing who God knows couldn't help it. Such pictures as Raffles, just to take a case in point, are to my mind exceptionally dangerous and bad propaganda for the unreasoning. Here is a man who, under the guise of friendship, eats his friend's soul, takes him by the hand, and under cover of the darkness, and a sleeping household robs him. In the film of revels, all the sympathy of the beholder is enlisted on behalf of this common, dirty sneak thief, instead of the play showing what a 99 out of 100 cases would have logically happened to him in actual life, Cheryl, and which, by the way, would tend to show that even apart from the ethics of common decency, it is an economic blunder to steal. He is shown as a hero of a romance and is, of course, allowed to escape free and clear. Pictures showing heroines in Riverside Drive apartments bearing and befeathered, surrounded by a bevy of obsequious serving wenches and an army of prize bikinis, while they, the heroines, hold streaming handkerchiefs to their eyes to the accompaniment of a subtitle which informed us that Mother Simply had to have an operation and it was the only way, are common to fatuousness. The fact that clinics are provided in every hospital where medical and surgical treatment is free of charge, of course never enters the nasty minds of the scenario writer, or it is still more nasty, because more commercial producer. The sacrifice of her honor is the tasty tidbit which must be served up on a platter of gold with a piquant sauce of neurotic and weak-spined hysteria. To show later the hospital or the river would fail, the producer or the carefully educated public will disgust at such crassness of reality. Such sordid details must be spared the delicate susceptibilities of those who are a few reels earlier thrilled deliriously at the aforesaid sacrifice, particularly if accompanied by a thrilling display of torn shirt-waist and disheveled hair. No hospital, no river. The audience must be placated, the heroine must be whitewashed at the 11th hour, so that there may be no airy privacy among the Simon Peers of the flock. And the aurora of which in the screenplay, the woman who goes out Melissa forethought to select her mate with or without the law as beseems her best, and then faces squarely the consequence of her own action, no matter what that consequence may be, is on the other hand a villainess of the deepest dye and rarely gets by the scissors of the thoroughly moral sensible. The sympathy of the mass is not with her. She has given them probably no thrills in the first place. She has not been directed by the hair to the apartment on Riverside Drive. She has not profited to the extent of showing us a bevy of maids and a collection of prize bikinis thrust unwillingly upon her as the result of Mother's operation, and she is not held to high heaven that she couldn't help it, depriving us thereby of the final exercise of our inalienable right to forgive. Again, I say that is pandering to the nasty desire for nasty things, to the morbid and hysterical craving of those whose principal object in coming to the theater is to see forbidden and therefore attractive scenes, which they are. After all, sinning by proxy is bad stuff, very bad stuff indeed. And there is another thing which helps to make this state of affairs inimitably worse, that is the advertising or publicity which the producer or exhibitor employs to stir up the worst side of a human nature to a pitch of curiosity which will redound to their inevitable harm and to his undoubted profit. It is only a few months ago that I saw a full-page advertisement in a New York Sunday paper which bore advertising to this effect in its largest and blackest type. She led one man to ruin, another to dishonor, and a third to death. See Miss Blank Ann. I'm at the point of seeing this picture. I was anxious to know what punishment could possibly be found meet for a lady of such disturbing pictorially proclivities. I must say that film thoroughly entirely lived up to its advertised specifications, but the punishment, why? Of course there is none. She couldn't help it. Her husband said so. In the title after which the scene faded out on a lengthy and thoroughly nauseating collage. This is only one instance of the harm that advertising is just one of the many, but powerful ramifications of the influence of the screen can accomplish. Take any advertising paper and read some of the idiotic and dangerous muck that is used to exploit certain screen productions. Only one thing seems to me to throw any hope on the situation, and that is that a pendulum can only swing just so far in one direction. It must finally swing the other way, We have had crime epitomized. We have had every kind of thrill, forbidden and otherwise, with the exception perhaps of the details of the punishment to fit the crime, until with the inevitable reversion of the pendulum. Who knows but that some day we shall be thrilled to dissolve at the sight of a daisy growing in the grass, or a sun setting across a silver sea. The advertising will tell us that it's the most beautiful sunset ever photographed, and the sexual aberrations of the heroine will not even be mentioned. When I think of Broken Blossoms, Mr. Griffith's great, because simple masterpiece, I see the signs of the times. End of section 11.
Section 12 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. Shadowland, October 1919 by Various. Ghosts by the Dreamer. All the old landmarks are swept away. The hanging bridge o'er the tiny stream that seemed a river to Wonderland in the youth days of our dream. All the old landmarks are swept away. Years are cruel and years are fleet. I walk strange ways where once I traced the wandering of your feet. The signposts are down along the way, memories that grip my throat with pain, odd little lanes to yesterday, woods that echo with summer rain. All the old landmarks are swept away, rivers and fields where the lilies grew, and oh, for the pain in the sad refrain, the love light in eyes that were strange and blue. End of section 12.
Section 13 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. Camera, by Hadi Baron and Saxon Cone. Cast. Narrator, read by Jim Hedrick.
Allison Allen, read by Catherine Seeholster.
Leslie Sautel, read by Donald Warren.
Archie Allen, read by Larry Wilson.
Elise Grafton, read by Stacy M.
Female Guest, read by Inkel.
Male Guest, read by Garden Variety.
The Movie Man, read by David Lawrence.
Singer, read by Stunning.
Rising curtain reveals the pergola porch and a corner of the lawn before the Artie Allen's Long Island country place at Rosedale. French doors open into the house, and beside the doors is a long stretch of whitewashed wall. Tubs of oddly cut bay, wicker chairs, cushions, and rugs are scattered about, and there is plenty of concrete evidence that Artie Allen's have been done by a decorator. In the extreme right foreground is a summer house discreetly hidden under the Gloire de Dijon roses, and there is a single rustic seat beginning to show traces of overwork. A full moon, such as always shines on the third act of one of Mr. Belasco's plays, illumes the scene with mellow glow. From within the house come the strains of the latest shimmy on the Victrola, and the lisp of dancing feet and entwined shadows flit by the open door and across the moonlit lawn. A female guest, accompanied by a male ditto, come out of the house and look vaguely at the moon.
The Allens do themselves awfully well, topping feed that dinner, but prohibition does take the pep out of a meal.
I'll say so. It's as dull and respectable as a woman in a high-necked gown, or at least one that's only 2.75% décolleté.
Some dress Allison's got on, or off, tonight, did you notice? She's a tonic for the eyes.
What woman isn't that? As for the gown, It wasn't to tonic our eyes that it was acquired. If you ask me, I should say cherchez le harbe.
Brightening.
Come to think of it, I believe I have seen her with that poet fellow Sawtell talking pretty frequently.
And then, the times we haven't seen them at all. Oh, there's no doubt but what he's the raison d'etre of this merry little gathering, and we're merely in the among those present class, all except Elise Grafton, and she's figured out to keep Archie amused.
She's figured out sufficiently, I'll concede that point. But I thought old Alan was devilish strict, went in for monogamy, respectability, and all those odd ideas. The same old stuff, you know.
I imagine he keeps his morals in his wife's name as he does his real estate. Most men do. Shh! Someone is coming.
Leslie Sawtell comes out of the house. He is tall, slim, with a suggestion of free verse in his personality, romantic hair and talented eyes. He looks as though expecting to see someone and discovers the female and male guests.
Oh, I didn't see you there at first. I'm in full retreat. Dodo Hastings is showing symptoms of resuming the even tenor of his ways and singing Toasties goodbye, and I fled. As a singer, Dodo is an awfully good plumber.
Conscientiously.
What'd you say, old thing? Shall we toddle in? I think I discovered Togo with a tray of glasses. They're private stock.
With a hollow groan as he follows her into the house.
Grape juice, lemon pop, Nestle's food.
Left in possession of the pergola and the moon, Leslie consults his wristwatch and, looking rather nervously about him, comes down the steps and crosses the lawn to the summer house. Once within, however, his confidence returns. He assumes an ardent pose. Obviously rehearsing.
The same moon over Babylon, and you and I. Oh, I have loved you for these 1,000 years, Lady of the Argent Moon.
Dropping to normal tone.
Not a bad line there.
He takes out a notebook and scribbles it down.
It might come in well in my next rondeau, Lady of the Argent Moon.
Allison Allen comes hurriedly and furtively from the house, looks about her, and runs across the lawn. She is svelte, symmetrical, and seductive, and for the rest there are the small matters of hair as densely black as the massed black night, skin argenter than the afore-quoted argent moon, and lips like the red insult of some red flower. A man's woman. She enters the summer house and clutches Leslie's arm with exaggerated caution.
Shh.
Nervously.
Do you think anyone saw you? That would be awful. I mean, for you, of course.
Well, I'd hate to have them know, but I'd rather like to have them suspect. When a woman ceases to be an object of suspicion, you may be pretty sure she ceased to be an object of attention. I'd be furious with anyone who said that I was carrying on an affair, but I'd absolutely cut anybody who ventures to say that I couldn't.
She seats herself on the bench and looks up at him archly.
Do you know that we haven't been alone together today, except for that stingy little stolen moment in the butler's pantry?
With tragedy.
I'll say I do. I worn out my patience and my watch looking for this moment to arrive.
With a pout.
I thought you seemed to be bearing up bravely at dinner. You talked steadily with your lips to that little Fayette Fane idiot, and with your eyes to that scarlet-haired Elise Grafton. You never caught my eye once.
Taking her hands.
The only way I can even be so much as civil to a woman now is by pretending she is you.
Well, as long as you don't carry the pretense too far.
She looks suggestively at him, Leslie accepting the suggestion and kissing her forthwith.
You little witch. You adorable.
Lest the audience should grow weary, the editor has unemotionally deleted a surplus supply of kisses here. The reader may season with them to individual taste during the following scene. It's a straight case of not being able to go too far. With a pretty pout, she knows it's pretty, having practiced it before her dressing-table mirror.
And you don't ever say these things? Or do these things to other women?
There are no other women. To me you are Eve herself, Original Eve, Eve incomparable, the first, the only woman in the world, Eve, my Eve, at whom I may gaze only through the barred gates of paradise.
What beautiful things you say, my poet.
It is because I have a beautiful inspiration, my poem.
With, doubtless, Argentine dreaminess.
How long have you loved me, my lover?
With a gesture, some gesture.
I have loved you ever since you were a queen in Babylon, and I was the least of your slaves. Behold.
He drops with drama to his knees before her and kisses the hem of her imported model.
Your slave then, my queen, throughout the ages, and tonight, tonight.
Heaves a bronchial sigh.
More than ever your slave tonight. Most glorious, more than ever before, tonight.
Soprano voice within the house with the tremolo stop out.
Oh, barren pain, oh, bitter loss, I kiss each bead and strive at last to learn to kiss the cross, sweetheart, to kiss the cross.
Tragically.
To kiss the cross. Yes, that's what love is. A cross to kiss. A bitter cross to kiss. A beautiful, terrible thing.
More perfidly, in evident enjoyment of her despair.
If only Archie weren't so narrow, so provincial in his attitude towards the whole affair. But he insists upon being disagreeable. Why, the other night we were playing blind man's bluff, so naively, so innocently. I am sure he peeked and caught you kissing me. There's nothing the man is not capable of. And afterwards...
She flings up her hands.
Oh la la! To have heard him go on, one would have thought I had been doing something out of the way.
Indignantly.
The bounder. Well, he's archaic, medieval. He'll be expecting you to darn his socks next, or to be the mother of his children. Does he think that being married gives him a monopoly on you? Doesn't he know that the watchword of this age is cooperation?
Vindictively.
If I could only get something on him with which to seal his lips. As a matter of almost fact, I just know he is carrying on an affair right now with Elise Grafton because he acted so grumpy when I was making out my list and suggested including her. When a husband admires a woman, you may have your suspicions, but when he says he can't see her for a forest of trees, you may be certain there is something going on.
Achieving a change of subject by the simple expedient of a soulful gaze.
You are simply radiant tonight, my queen. The moon is infinitely becoming to you. You should always wear a night like this, Lady of the Argent Moon, a purple night all spangled with the stars.
Man has come out on the veranda and, after looking about, calls, crossly.
Allie, Damerel, where are you now?
Scrambling to his feet.
Your husband.
Dropping poetry for prose.
Oh, rats!
Shakes her fist in the direction of voice.
You just wait. If a little scheme I've been working works right, I'll have you where I want you, old thing. What's Tabasco for the gander?
Rising.
But I suppose we'll have to go now. Do I look kissed or anything?
Nervously.
I hope there isn't any makeup on me. Women do rub off so nowadays.
They saunter forth with the exaggerated innocence of the guilty, Allison humming a little tune.
Hello, Arch. Where have you been? But there. I suppose that's a tactless, not to say a foolish question, with the fair Elise so accessible.
Rendered speechless by an attack where he had anticipated a retreat.
What? Will all of the...
Following up the attack.
Got a light, old man? Thanks. Awfully. I suppose tobacco will be the next to go, and then they'll pass the constitutional amendment making hell illegal.
He passes gracefully into the house. Allison looks up at her husband with a wide and baby stare.
Don't tell me that stupid cook has got salt in the ices again, or that toy Pom has a cold or anything like that. You have the most dire expression.
Darkly.
Where have you been? That's all I want to know. Where have you been, I say, with that collar and cootie, that spoon specialist, that cheap rhyme peddler, the backdoor Romeo, that...
With dignity.
If you're talking about Mr. Saltwell, Archie, which I find it hard to believe, you are only giving a free demonstration of your own ignorance. His free verse is very well known.
Savagely.
Free verse and free love usually go hand in hand. I tell you, I won't have you flirting with that abysmal ass under my very nose.
Sweetly.
Then we'll find a shadier spot. In the meantime, need we discuss this here, Archie? You can beat me later, you know, when the house is quieted down for the night.
Between his teeth.
You ought to be beaten. It would be different if you could even think you had anything on me. You haven't. You never have had. I've never so much as looked at another woman since I first looked at you.
He goes off abruptly in a huff. Allison laughs bitterly.
All men are liars. That's in the Bible. But there's one exception. My poet man.
A man's figure carrying a small motion picture project machine comes around the corner of the house. Allison starts, then runs to meet him. Sotto voce.
We're ready, Mrs. Allen. It was a damn ticklish job, but I don't think anyone knew they were being tickled.
Eagerly.
Are you sure that you took everything I wanted? The tennis match this morning, the swimming in the pool, the poker crowd, and the other picture?
Everything, Mrs. Allen. The one in the summer house was a humdinger, I'll tell the world.
You're positive it's what I wanted? The girl with the red hair and the green smock and the tall, dark man?
Them's the birds.
Breathlessly.
And they did. They were.
With unctuous reminiscence.
I've seen Thorabetta and all the best kissers in the profession, and I never saw anything to equal this afternoon.
Clenching her hands.
Ooh, the designing little cat. When Archie sees in her, it will serve them right to show them up before everybody. These sanctimonious men. I know 'em, and a red-haired woman. Blah! I guess after this, Archie will have to turn his nose the other way if he doesn't care to see my affairs de coeur carried on beneath it.
To the movie man.
Where can you throw the pictures? We'll have it done at once.
Indicating the blank space of whitewashed wall.
There's a screen for it, Mrs. Allen.
He begins to set up his apparatus. Allison goes to the door, claps her hands, addressing her guests.
Listen, everybody. I've a little surprise for you. We're going to see yourself as others see you. I've had a couple of movie men with cameras hidden in the various shrubberies all day taking pictures of you, and now he's going to show them. Everyone come out on the veranda, please.
The guests file out on the veranda, laughing and talking with here and there evident traces of suppressed nervousness. One male guest to another.
If that camera caught me registering every emotion I felt today, I'm going to look around now and choose the nearest exit.
One female guest to another.
A fiendish scheme, I call it. Taking pictures of our faces behind our backs.
Seeking out his wife.
Oh, say now, Hallie, this is hardly fair. Without any warning, you know.
Looking at him maliciously.
Why? Why should you mind? You haven't registered anything more than a corking game of tennis and several full houses at cards, have you?
Archie retires, glowering. Everyone finds chairs, and amid a certain atmosphere of tenseness, the performance begins. Archie is discovered with 3 other guests on the court, doing various expert backhand strokes, etc., and glancing every now and then about him as though looking for someone he is not able to find. There is a look of hurt in his eyes which the camera has caught. He is also to be seen playing at poker with Elise Grafton and 3 male guests. The camera does not discover that he looks more than the barest civility requires at the scarlet-haired lady before him. His eyes have the same inquiring expression. The camera clicks and the summer house is shown under its innocuous roses. Elise is discovered sitting on the worn bench, and kissing the hem of her garment with almost prehistoric fervor is Leslie Sawtell. As he raises his impatient face, a lip reader might have detected something about moon and argent and, vaguely, ancient Babylon. Guests tenfold with but a single voice.
Some scene!
With hysterical shriek.
Take it away! Take it away!
Rising, whiter than an icicle under the suddenly gibbous moon.
Take me indoors, Archie. I've never cared for comedy burlesque, even on the screen.
They rise and pass the guests on the way to the house. Allison gives the collapsed Leslie a withering, blasting, devastating glance, and muttering something about
male vamps,
disappears from view. From within the house, her voice trails sweetly forth into the stricken moonlight.
Itty-bitty hubby boy, Allie's itty-arty art.
Guests groan in unison. Leslie lights a cigarette. Good night is flashed across the pseudo-screen. Curtain falls, even as Babylon. End of section 13.
Section 14 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Lindsay Ann Cameron. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. Section 14, The Doll's House, by Elizabeth Peltret. People are always treating me as if I were a child, said Wanda Hawley. This is the only thing I can think of about her that reminds me of Ibsen at all. This, and the fact that she lives in a veritable doll's house, a little 4-room bungalow which faces a grass-covered, flowery bungalow court, together with about 9 other bungalows, all exactly alike and all looking very tiny in comparison with the big Hollywood houses around them. For the rest, she is all Peg o' my heart, and not even a little bit Nora. She was looking very exquisite and very contented, sitting comfortably relaxed in a big wicker rocking chair. She had worked hard all day, and ordinary American wonders if Ibsen's Nora would have made such a fuss about being treated as a child if she had worked hard all day. Probably not. Anyhow, there was nothing of Nora's relentlessness about Wanda, nor was there anything of the stage ingenue. She made the remark about being treated as a child simply and quite apropos of the conversation. She had translated a Latin phrase for a scenario writer at the studio that morning and, as a result, had been asked by everyone on set where she had learned the translation. It seemed impossible to them that anyone could be so beautiful and still know Latin. Wanda taught Latin while she was taking a postgraduate course at normal school. Not only this, but she had earned money ever since she can remember. First, with her music, playing accompaniments. She played for Albert Spaulding before he was so famous as he is now, and later when she was studying vocal music in New York, posing for artists and photographers. She is the most perfect blonde imaginable, and her skin is a thing of wonder, so soft and delicately fair that she needs almost no makeup for screen. Verily, one can have everything, beauty and brains and all. But I was telling you about her work for the screen. Her first moving picture, The Derelict, with Stuart Holmes, was a triumph for her. She was called Wanda Petite then. That was 2 years ago, and she is steadily improving her technique and depth ever since, as witnessed in her latest pictures, Old Wives for New, We Can't Have Everything, and For Better for Worse. Now she has been given the title role in Peg O' My Heart, the most longed-for part in all Hollywood. On the night I saw her, she had stayed in the studio until 8:30. When one is busy becoming a screen star, one works. All she had had to eat during the day had been one sandwich. Leaving the studio at 8:30, her husband was not to be found. He had waited outside for hours, but had chosen just that moment to go to the corner for some cigarettes. So we walked the 2 blocks to the Mount Olive garage, which he owns, and I stood on the outside while his wife went in and robbed the cash register. "I'm so dreadfully hungry," she remarked, "and tired." Later, her husband, a boyish young man of 24, with dark hair and large, dark eyes, came into the confectionery store while she was eating shrimp salad and ice cream. "I wish you would eat sensibly," he said a little crossly. He hadn't had his dinner either. After dinner, the 3 of us went to the Doll's House bungalow on Wilcox Street, where the Hollys live. "When Peg is finished," said Wanda, "I'm going to begin having dinner at home again. But now, I wouldn't attempt to cook. She doesn't keep a maid." "There is so little work here," she said, "and I love doing it." She looks so exquisitely delicate that it gives one the impression of always playing at things, as though anything she might touch would immediately cease to be grubbing work for her. I thought of her as I had seen her in the making of Secret Service. She looked like romance incarnate. Her costume was dainty, beruffled, low cut at the neck. She sat in an old-fashioned armchair, her hands resting quietly in her lap. The camera was not on her, but she was entirely in character. She looked, I thought, as though she had deliberately put herself in the correct mood, and then just as deliberately forgotten that it wasn't real, like a child playing show. But to return to my interview. She leaned back in her wicker rocking chair, content in the knowledge of work well done. Burton, friend-husband, sat opposite her. He had run upstairs to change hurriedly after coming home from the garage, only to discover too late that he had put on a shirt over much starched by the laundry. He was faced with the uncomfortable necessity of sitting as though he had swallowed a ramrod, or of subduing its swelling propensities by occasionally poking it into flatness. "Do you know," said his lovely wife, half teasing, "it is so hard for me to get used to having a husband again, now that Burton is back from the army." "I hate these starched shirts," said Burton. "While he was gone," Wanda went on, "I had a little 2-room apartment. I used to have some of my girlfriends come in, and we would go to a picture show or read evenings when I didn't have to work." Her favorite pastime is going to moving picture shows. As with all really ambitious players, her work has become her hobby too. She couldn't stay away and be content. "But now," she added, "if I want to do anything, I have to remind myself that my husband is home and must be consulted about the matter. I think that getting wives accustomed to consulting their husbands about things when they have lost the habit is a serious after-the-war problem." "But suppose they never had the habit?" This from friend-husband. "Now, dearest," laughingly, and the subject turned to what they plan to do when Peg is finished. After Peg, Wanda Holly is going to have the bungalow all fixed up in creatine and give a dinner party. And then I'm going to town, Los Angeles, a 35-minute ride, and buy some clothes. I haven't been outside of Hollywood since the beginning of Peg. She is entirely without affectation. For instance, she told an interesting little story about a really exquisite sports skirt she has. It only cost her, she said frankly, about $7. We were invited to an affair at the Hollywood Hotel. I worked until 5:30, and then, when I came home, I found that I hadn't a thing to wear. I hadn't had time to take care of my clothes. Everything was mussed or torn or had something wrong with it. So I went to a little store down here on the boulevard. The only thing they had that fitted was a last year's sports skirt. This is it. They took 2 pleats at the sides, and you see the result. It was truly remarkable. But just wait until you see some of the things I'm going to get after Peg. It was almost 1 o'clock when I left, but the Hollies, both of them, took me all the way home in their car, though they were both very tired. Such happy, ambitious youngsters. Not merely selfish ambitious, but ambitious for each other. Have you ever seen newspaper articles that begin by asking, what was of most importance to a woman? Beauty or brains, fame and money, or love in a cottage? Have you ever thought that it was possible for one person to have all of these things? No. Well, it is, for here is Wanda Holly, who came out of rainy, foggy Seattle, lives in a cottage in Hollywood, and is known all over the world, ready to prove it for you by the genuine smile in her eyes. End of section 14, A Doll's House.
Section 15 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Donald Warren. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. The Fighting Actors of the A.E.F. by John Hopkins. 2 bodies of workers came through the fire and blood test of the World War with flying colors, the Salvation Army and the players. The achievements of the Salvation Army are now a matter of history. This article is an effort to record something of the activities of the actor in one field of war work, keeping up the morale of his brothers on the firing line. The generosity and the self-sacrifice of the player in times of need have always asserted themselves. The players in this country, for instance, did a tremendous work in putting over the various Liberty loan drives and war-saving stamp campaigns. They fought shoulder to shoulder behind the fighting men, but in this limited space, we have only time to deal with the actors who fought with the soldiers. It was natural that the vast American expeditionary forces should produce a number of acting companies, just as it produces its individual baseball and football teams. The first of these dramatic organizations, and the only one officially recognized, was the Argonne Players, organized in the Lorraine sector in July 1918. These players made history. The Argonne Players first numbered 20 players. The first performance was given on the 4th of July. From that day, the Argonne Players became a growing and advancing organization, never losing its identity. The actors were not permitted to devote their whole time to entertaining their brothers, nor did they desire to, for a bigger work was on. They played during their out-of-the-line intervals, returning to their various regiments when their units moved back to the fighting zone. The Argonne Players were organized from men of the 77th Metropolitan Division, made up largely of New York City men. The personnel of the division naturally numbered many players, and as the Argonne Players grew, they came to include Percy Helton, the well-known juvenile actor, Jack Waldron, a comedian and dancer, Howard Greer, who designed all the scenery, posters, and costumes, Fred Roth and Alfred Dubin, who wrote the books and lyrics of the productions, Stuart Sage, Henry Cahill, Mario Rodolfi, and others. The initial performance, given on the 4th of July, was a minstrel show presented in the Municipal Theater at Baccarat in the Vosges. The theater was located some 12 kilometers from the fighting line, and the audience included a visiting French general and 15,000 doughboys. From that opening performance, the Argonne Players went through a series of thrilling experiences absolutely unlike those ever encountered by a body of actors. They played in all sorts of places: quiet vineyards far from the front, in shell-shattered chateaus, in wrecked barns under fire, and in the open air under camouflaged trees. Many times shells burst a few feet away from their impromptu stage, but the players came through unscathed. One shell might have wiped out the whole cast. Just one member lost his life, David Hochstein, the violinist. His death occurred in the trenches under fire. The Argonne players developed a style of performance all their own. They created a revue which they termed the Amex Revue, comprising a succession of various acts. This was unlike the musical comedies with choruses and the typical numbers given by the various other American acting units, which were created later and at total variance with the British pantomime performances. The Argonne players encountered many colorful experiences. Once early in October 1918, while playing on the edge of the Argonne Wood, in a ruined cathedral minus a roof, a flock of enemy bombing planes suddenly appeared overhead. The Boche airmen noticed the lights of the performance and began dropping explosives. Some of these fell 50 feet away, but the players kept on with their roles, although the officer ordered the lights flashed out. The Argonne players boasted the fact that the Germans never once held up a performance. Sometimes, however, they were forced to play in gas masks. Earlier in 1918, in August to be exact, the Argonne players went through another bombing experience while giving their review in the Vasa sector on the grounds of a chateau formerly occupied by the German Crown Prince. Hidden by camouflage trees, they kept on with their review. Here they utilized the Crown Prince's own piano, a small walnut instrument inlaid with gold, which they later took back to America with them. It was about the time of the Chateau Thierry drive that the players began to enlarge their company and develop their review along broader lines. All this time they had been encountering tremendous difficulties in building scenery. They had found it impossible to get either canvas or dyes. This taxed their Yankee ingenuity for a time, but they soon had a scenic equipment built from captured burlap, which they painted in futuristic style from pigments made of crushed fruits. The review had begun to be talked about all along the American line by this time, and during the Chateau Thierry drive, they moved their division down into the Argonne forest. The officers realized that their men needed recreation during the tremendous days of the drive, and the Argonne players were stationed in a barn at Florent, where the review ran for 30 days. All the men coming out of the front lines passed through Florent on their way back to the rest sections, and all the replacement men moved up through the town, so thousands of doughboys watched the show during this trying period. The Amex Review developed some odd features. Harry Cahill, a soldier, was discovered to be a remarkable feminine impersonator, although he had never done this sort of work before. Paris went wild later over Cahill, and the members of the American colony purchased costumes for him of Lucille. Another favorite act was an emotional playlet done by Helton and Sage. A little later, the Americans captured a big German theater in the forest, a theater which apparently had been used by the Huns as an amusement center. It was equipped with a bathing pool, a cinema theater, and bowling alleys, and there the Argonne players enjoyed a luxurious run of 3 days. It was at this theater that Alexander Wolcott, a New York dramatic critic, while serving in France, ran across them. Wolcott sent back an interesting article about them, centering upon the picturesque way in which the non-temperamental actors in khaki cooked their dinner upon the stage after the performance, and how, rolling up in blankets among the scenery, they peacefully went to sleep. During the last 3 nights of the war, before the armistice came, the players were near the Luxembourg border, where they were under a terrific fire from the retreating Huns. After the end of hostilities, the players began what developed almost into a tour of France. They played at many railroad centers for incoming and outgoing soldiers. Meanwhile, the YMCA outfits, the Salvation Army workers, and the war correspondents had carried word back to Paris of their unusual entertainment, and they were brought to the new Théâtre des Champs-Élysées late in November, when for 3 nights they played to a capacity and turned some 18,000 away. One other interesting after-the-war experiences was a performance giving at the big military hospital at Savernay, where they played in a theater seating 3,000. This theater was built and managed by Schuyler Ladd, another American actor. In December 1918, they gave a performance for Margaret Wilson, daughter of the President. She cabled to her father to be sure to see them upon his arrival, and on January 18, 1919, they played before the presidential party at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. It was a brilliant audience, numbering aside from President and Mrs. Wilson, Marshal Foch, Lloyd George, and many diplomats and officers. Their audience gave their Amex review of 1918 a thunderous reception. Moreover, it was the first and only performance of its kind ever given before an American president. Between this date and the performance before Miss Wilson, they had toured extensively, appearing at the headquarters at Tours, in Bordeaux, and the seaport towns. After the presidential performance, they played all the rest areas in France for the entertainment of the American lads. During all this time, their audiences had consisted solely of soldiers, except at the presidential performance, although a few French and British had watched the performance as guests. The Argonne players had planned to visit Monte Carlo, Nice, London, and several English cities, but orders came for them to return to America to aid the Fifth Liberty Loan Drive. Once in New York, their plans were again shifted, and after appearing for 2 New York engagements, they were disbanded. Before sailing from France, General Pershing complimented them on their work, at the same time congratulating the players upon their coolness under fire. They sailed for home on April 17th, arrived on April 25th, having entertained the officers and soldiers during the trip over via the Mount Vernon, and after their appearances at the Manhattan and Lexington opera houses, they disbanded on May 31st, 1919, having existed as a unit for 11 months. Dozens of other acting companies appeared during this time, but the Argonne players were the only organization authorized by the War Department as a recognized unit. During most of their time, they were under the command of Lieutenant Warren Diefendorf. In the 11 months, they played to 1 million men, sometimes giving 10 performances a day. Once they played from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock the next. They traveled by motor truck, actors, scenery, and costumes being transported in the truck, an airplane trailer carrying the props. Sometimes they gave their review right on the truck, with automobile lights as footlights. Aside from the loss of David Hochstein, Howard Greer and Fred Rath were wounded in action. Percy Helton was cited for bravery on the battlefield, so it is clear that the fighting actors did their bit both in and back of the line. Now the Argonne players are a memory, but the days when they performed at the front, with shells dropping all about them, aren't likely to be forgotten by the actors themselves or the doughboys who found relief and relaxation in their work. End of section 15.
Section 16 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Shadowland, October 1919, by Various. Please get married. Ferdinand Oliver Walton picked 6 ripe apples with the toe of his long-bambed shoe, lit a cigarette, threw the cigarette away, heaved 8 prodigious sighs which, aside from registering emotion, considerably inflated his chest, and then dropped on his side beneath the apple tree. Muriel Harper Ashley took an engagement ring off one finger and put it restively on another various successive times, powdered her small decisive nose unnecessarily, picked an apple herself, and finally dropped happily to the side of Ferdinand Oliver. "Oh, darling," groaned Ferdinand Oliver. "Oh, ducky," moaned Muriel Harper. "Being engaged is hell," intoned Ferdinand. "Being married would be heaven," supplied Ferdinand Oliver. Suddenly he sat erect. He rumpled his ferocious hair with ferocious fingertips. His eyes blazed. His nervous hand sought, found, and clenched the nervous hand of Muriel. "I tell you what it is," he began. "We'll put an end to this misery. It's not my fault I was born too late to be of any use to you or to myself. No, sirree. It's my mother's fault, and my father's fault. Yes, it's their faults.
I don't know on which side the fault is the greater, but I shan't suffer for it, not any longer. I believe they did this with malice aforethought. They knew it would come to this. It's just like father." Muriel Harper laid a placating hand upon his increasingly belligerent shoulder. Privately, she considered him perfectly magnificent. "There are only 3 more months," she reminded him, "and you'll be 21. She added, "And mine," but very softly, for she was shy, and this was first love, and she had not learned the vocabulary as yet. Ferdinand Oliver turned upon her and waved his histrionic hands. 3 months, he affirmed with fervour, am the straw that will break this camel's back. We've been engaged for 3 years, and that's just 3 years too long. And we're not going to be milk and water engaged any longer. Not if I know it." He turned flamingly upon her. "What do you say?" he demanded to know, with considerably more of ferocity than amour. Muriel felt that the moment required adequacy of her. "Let's go see Mother," she volunteered. She'll know." Ferdinand Oliver lacked 3 months to his desirable majority. There his lack ceased. He made up for it in many other ways, such as a Bearcat racing car, and several bank accounts, and other little assets of a like nature. Also, there were various wills made out in his favour, and a great many eyes were upon him, social, financial, and otherwise. There was nothing to stop him from getting the racing car and racing on to his and Muriel's consummation that he could see. He had reached, he felt, a limit. Besides, it was spring, and spring does odd things to a chap. Makes things lovelier. Makes them hurt, too. Tugs and pulls at one. Makes, for instance, long engagements so many insults. Makes marriage to the only girl imperative, insistent. There was nothing at all the matter with the Bearcat car. It was in the pink of condition. It didn't feel, not in the least, the pale green budding of the young May. But you see, its driver did. That's why it stopped so many times on the way down to the country estate of the Ashleys. So many unnecessary times, speaking mechanically. So many times in unfrequented spots where there wasn't much possibility of any passer-by. Perhaps if it hadn't stopped so many times... "I have to kiss you so much, you see," explained Ferdinand, rather at random after several of them, "to make up for all the time we've wasted not being married." He groaned with a tragical gesture. "The time we've wasted," he repeated. "The time." "I do love you," said Muriel. She found it a completely satisfactory speech to make upon all and any occasion when with Ferdinand Oliver. It was, at least, inevitably adequate, and all that could be expected of her, and she felt it. Oh, she felt it, in every pore. The Ashley country place had an appearance of desertion. "Golf, I suppose," suggested Muriel, of her well-known progenitors. "We'll get the licence in the village," suggested Ferdinand, "and then phone for a minister from here, and be married here where you made mud pies as a kiddie, blessed one." The licence was comparatively simple. A mere matter of lying a bit, just whitely, you know, about ages, etc. Ferdinand wondered, savagely, why he hadn't done all this before. Last spring even, when the naggings were so bad. On the return trip with the licence, there were various little stops of the long-suffering and wholly unemotional Bearcat. Perhaps if they had gone right on, perhaps if they had, they might have intercepted Soapy Higgins and his partner, the parson, in their little afternoon recreation of removing most of the Ashley plate and jewels. As it was, the elder Lashleys came in just in time to allow Soapy to remove the flat silver and make his getaway, while the parson, less agile, was reduced to a clothes press in Muriel's room. The unsuspecting Ashleys, mère et père, greeted the young people on the porch. They were of the rare gender who have not forgotten the pangs of their own early amaze. They seemed to know just all about young Ferdinand's flaming cheeks and cold hands, and the lump in his throat, and the constriction, icy-like, in his chest. They seemed to be quite in tender accord with the vague, eager uneasiness of Muriel. When they proclaimed together, throatily, "We want to get married. We must. We must," they looked at one another and smiled, rather beautifully, rather reminiscently, as though they heard the whispering of still animate hours, laid away with reverent touch in lavender. "Of course," said the elder Ashley, "there must be a minister, according to a proper sequence of events. First an engagement, then a licence, then a—" His weighty statement was summarily interrupted by the appearance of a somehow ecclesiastical individual, rather rumpled, much at a loss, and considerably out of breath. Apparently, and quite unaccountably, he had come from above. To the 4 interrogative pairs of eyes focused upon him, he said, "I'm parson." It was succinct. It was likewise something in the nature of an ancient miracle. "There's the hand of God in this," muttered Ferdinand. "Amen," whispered Muriel, and then she took his hand and pressed it, and there was an interlude. During the interlude, Ashley, Père, had arranged for the ceremonial, and it took place forthwith, with the odour of the opening honeysuckle all about them, and a few early, mating birds calling over them, and the flush of the May sunset caressing them with a faint rose luminosity. Now and then the parson had to be prompted, having a vague way of trailing off into rapt silences, and Ferdinand Oliver had to be prodded, in order to take the ring from Father Ashley's hand, because he was gazing into Muriel's eyes, and was the world forgetting utterly. Otherwise, the sacrament was complete. Afterward, they had tea on the porch, and the parson suggested that he depart, having, he told them, "just dropped in, it being a little informal habit he had, and yes, he would do it again, without a doubt." After tea, Ferdinand suggested that they be moving on. "There's father to be reckoned with, you know," he said. "I don't feel quite up to father tonight. He's a bit pyrotechnic when he's balked. I think we'll be moving on. We'll just drop in on some hotel for the night." 3 hours later, the young Ferdinand Olivers had supped on nectar and ambrosia, and were just about, in their hotel room, to replace the garish electrics by the pale imminence of the pervasive moon, when there came a sharp rapping at their inviolate doors. Muriel reared up among the pillows. Her small pink face took on the pillow tone. "It's your father, Ferdinand," she quavered. "Oh, I felt that the worst was to come. He must have been behind us all the time." The rapping grew rather brutal. Demands were being made. "What kind of a house?" bellowed a desecrating voice to the tune of the rapping. "What kind of a house did they think they were in? What kind? This house had a name to keep up. Nothing of this sort had ever occurred before. They would leave, or they could be assisted to leave. Violence wasn't sought for by the owner of the voice, but violence it would be if they were not clear of the premises in half an hour at the latest, at the most. They were to go at once. They were not to wait for nothing, not for nothing." When it was possible to edge in a word, Ferdinand faintly inquired the nature of their particular outrage. He suggested that they had been decorously wedded at the home of the bride's parents. Admitted, of course, that his own paternal blessing had been conspicuous by its absence, but surely, as for respectability, and they were very tired. The day had been strenuous. Please to go away. He might have said more, but the rapping recommenced, accompanied by the fearful information that the hell they said, married, not much, thief, a common thief had pulled the marriage stunt for them, and there was no more respectability there than, well, what had a thief, a second-story man, to do with the voice that breathed o'er Eden? And they weren't the only tired ones, and were they going to quit it before it became necessary for the other guests that their good name might remain unblemished? There was a terrible silence on the nuptial side of the door. Then Ferdinand said, going out into the corridor, very quietly, "We'll leave." A final rap and a threatening, "Half an hour!" And there was silence. "That chap," vouchsafed Ferdinand, when the noises had ceased, and Muriel, shivering, had pulled the bedclothes precisely to the breathing point of vantage of her nose. "That chap! A thief! Played a trick on us! Oh, rotten! Rotten! What a mess!" We didn't know," blushed Muriel, half inaudibly. "We can't go out there," proclaimed Ferdinand. There was an admission of outrage in his voice. "Of course not," quavered Muriel. Her eyes sought the fire escape and lingered. "We might go out there," she suggested, and wait." Ferdinand Oliver turned his pyjamaed person carefully about and surveyed the escape. "Let's," he said. Midway down, they crouched and waited. From the well of inky darkness, the reiterated rappings did not sound so imminent and dreadful. After a while, they suspected, and rightly, that a master key was opening their locked door, and that their departure was being profanely, if relievedly, commented upon. "Of course," Ferdinand would mutter, "Father's responsible for this." Near to morning, they crept stiffly back. They might, they thought, just might get in a bit of rest before morning. Then they could go for good and adjust this fiasco. They went for good considerably before morning. It might have been the scorching shame they had put upon the place. It might have been some mere playful incendiary. But the worthy and reputable hotel took to itself flames in the wee hours of the morning, and burned cheerily and completely to the ground, surrounded by a full circle of night-clad, blasphemous or resigned persons, according to their several dispositions and possessions. Ferdinand Oliver rescued his racer, ensconced Muriel, and set off for the Ashleys again, to see what might be seen. The Ashleys were again awaiting them upon the porch. Both amiable persons gave strong evidence of sleeplessness. "Where have you been?" they called, as the racer made the final curve. "Oh, where have you been?" There was a third person with them, a man. He wore a badge and a suspicious expression. Both were fully displayed. He was, Mrs. Ashley explained rather tearfully, a detective. "Your father?" she said to Ferdinand. "Of course," said Ferdinand, and set his mouth. "That terrible person, Parson, he called himself," Mrs. Ashley continued, holding fast to Muriel, "is a common thief. That much this man has discovered. He removed most of the flat silver in company with an individual called Soapy before he, oh, my child, before he didn't do anything to you and Ferdy. How terrible it all is! How terrible!" Muriel thought so too, and began to sob. The night had not been without its terrors. There were those rappings, those accusations, the black pit of the night viewed from the fire escape, the icy clutch of Ferdinand's hand, the overwhelming fact they were still engaged, or if not engaged, what then? What? Muriel and Ferdinand discarded their unengagement-like night apparel, and were about to go forth in search of a bona fide clergyman, when Ferdinand's father arrived upon the hysterical scene, accompanied by a severe-looking person, sex feminine. There was nothing of the irate parent in the aspect of Ferdinand's erstwhile belligerent parent. His air was quite distinctly apologetic. He seemed to be holding very tight to the severe-looking person, who wore, none the less, gay feathers in her hat and had a touch of rouge on either cheek. Ferdinand's father began to talk, quite volubly and excitedly. "You see," he said, "we just ran across one another last night I'm sorry, son. I didn't just know. When I was looking up this gentleman with the badge for you, this lady and we were sweethearts long ago. One can be a widower too long. A sort of atrophy, I sort of stiffen up about hardening of the arteries. It was rather lamentable. May sat grotesquely on the paternal shoulders. Ferdinand Oliver blushed for his parent, even while it came to him that his 3 months' deficiency no longer meant anything in his father's young life. Nothing meant anything save the spinster with the rouge spots on her cheeks. "And now," suggested the elder Ferdinand amicably, "I propose that I go for a clergyman, order a nuptial feast, and we have a double ceremony here this blithe May morning. What do you say, my son?" Ferdinand groaned and collapsed onto the railing. "Toddle along," he admonished his rejuvenated parent. "So long as it's the guaranteed article and I can sleep, I'm with you. Make it snappy, old top, just as one bridegroom to another." When the elder Ferdinand returned, some half-hour later, to the porch that Mrs. Ashley and Muriel had bowered with roses, he had with him a very Reverend Jenkins, with the uttermost sort of a prayer book and hymnal in hand, and an expression that was a marriage sacrament in itself. Only Ferdinand was missing. When he was sought for and found, he was found to be struggling valiantly with the parson of yesterday, who had so complicated and fire-escaped and otherwise fired their honeymoon eve. Parson had come back for more. His table service, he had felt, was not complete. Ferdinand had just dealt him a ringing blow, when the Reverend Jenkins scaled the staircase to reach the scene of combat. "But upon my soul," exclaimed the Reverend Jenkins, "that is Jedediah Parsons. He was a classmate of mine. What does all this mean? If he married you young people, you are married, fast and tight." Jedediah Parsons was recovering from young Ferdinand's well-aimed blow. "I must have fallen asleep preparing my sermon, or something," he said rather painfully. The Reverend Jenkins lifted him to his feet. "This chap's had amnesia," he said. "It will explain the whole thing. But he's Jedediah, all right, all right." Ferdinand raised a beckoning finger to Muriel. Ferdinand Senior turned upon them, his spinster by his side. "Where you going?" he wanted to know. Ferdinand gave a prodigious yawn. It was quite a histrionic, nicely contrived yawn. Muriel rubbed her pretty eyes with pretty weariness. "You see, father," said Ferdinand, we didn't get much sleep last night, to speak of." End of section 16. Read by Damerel. Brisbane, Australia, March 2024.
Section 17 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. Shadowland, October 1919 by Various. Mistaken Identity by G.C. Beck. Maybe it happened that you were walking down the street and met a sweet little lady with whom you felt very familiar because you had known her so long on the screen. And you almost said hello before you discovered that she only resembled your little favorite. For you felt sure that if it had been the one you had in mind, she would have been very glad to see you. And you went on, and maybe you saw a fascinating woman whom you recognized as your most heartless vampire of the screen. Yet you lifted your hat before you were aware that it was only her counterpart for you knew that she wasn't really bad or conceited, and would be truly glad to see you. Or maybe you saw a tall, bronzed man who seemed alone in the crowd, and you rushed eagerly up, for you had no doubt that your Superman, who embodied your true ideal in the shadow realm of Western chivalry, would be glad to see you, and to shake your hand. Or maybe it was a slim little man who looked very serious, yet you thought it was your favorite clown of the pictures, and you laughed to yourself in anticipation of the queer grin with which he would greet you, and the odd walk or the funny fall he would gladly do for your special benefit. And though you realized that you had only met their prototypes, you went home proud to know in your heart that you really had so many friends who were rich and famous, and who would always be glad to see you. End of section 17.
Section 18 of Shadowland, October 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Donald Warren. Shadowland, October 1919. By Various. The Court of the Sage. To be happy, learn what you know not, and teach what you know. A literary man of note sends me a list of books and wants to know my opinion of it. He says the best sensational novel is The Woman in White, the best dramatic novel, The Count of Monte Cristo, the best dramatic novel, The Vicar of Wakefield, the best marine novel, Mr. Midshipman Easy, the best novel of country life, Adam Bede, the best military novel, Charles O'Malley, the best religious novel, Ben-Hur, the best sporting novel, Sedan, the best political novel, Lothair, the best novel written for a purpose, Uncle Tom's Cabin, the best imaginative novel, She, the best pathetic novel, Old Curiosity Shop, the best humorous novel, Pickwick Papers, the best Irish novel, Handy Andy, the best Scotch novel, The Heart of Midlothian, the best English novel, Vanity Fair, the best American novel, Scarlet Letter, the best novel of all, The Heavenly Twins. Is it not strange he does not find a place for such classics as Lorna Doone, Jane Eyre, Cloister on the Hearth, Don Quixote, Gil Blas, and the greatest of all, Les Miserables? That is quite apropos now that the governor of North Carolina said to the governor of South Carolina, "It is a long time between drinks." William T., I fear you will never be as great as your father. We hear of chips of the old block, but the truth is that parents seldom transmit their great intellectual powers to their children. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Shakespeare, Milton, Buffon, Cuvier, who are fair examples of the great intellects of their time, did not transmit their power to their progeny. What is known as genius is not transmittable. The creation of a man of genius seems to require a special effort of nature, after which, as if fatigued, she reposes for a time before making a similar effort. Distinguished men seldom have distinguished sons. A fond mother wants to know if I believe in letting small children have dictionaries to study. Dear me, no. Unless they are something like this: bedtime, shut-eye time, dust, mud with the juice squeezed out, fan, a thing to brush, warm off with, fins, a fish's wings, ice, water that stayed out in the cold and went to sleep, monkey, a very small boy with a tail, nest egg, an egg that the old hen measured by to make new ones, pig, a hog's little boy, salt, what makes your potato taste bad when you don't put it on, snoring, letting off sleep, stars, the moon's eggs, wakefulness, eyes that are all the time coming unbuttoned. As Thoreau says, there's something almost petty about an ultra-refined taste, for it easily degenerates into effeminacy, and it does not consider the broadest use. Good taste is a quality of the mind that can be, but which is seldom is, cultivated by refining influences and intellect effort. Nobody studies how to acquire taste, yet it is a quality akin to genius, and one that can be acquired whereas genius cannot. It is that faculty of the soul which discerns the beauties of a thing with pleasure and its imperfections with dislike. A young divinity student at Wesleyan University asks me to write a few words on wastes. No, for no doubt it would be a waste of words. Speaking of wastes, there is not so much to be said now as there was a few years ago, when our best ladies looked like wasps with figures like an hourglass. Their waists are quite sensible now, not because women are very sensible, because it just happened so. No longer need they fear an anti-corset league, but it would be a mighty good thing if there were an anti-high heel league. Why women insist on walking upon stilts when nature has provided them with two perfectly good and lovely feet is more than I can understand. Mr. Morton, you will never set the world on fire. You are too conservative, too cautious, and too evenly balanced. He who fears to climb lest he fall, or to lie down lest he be trampled upon, or to walk lest he be overtaken, will never freeze nor burn. He will simply sizzle, dry up, and blow away. Two twin fans want to know what I think is the greatest photodrama ever produced. That is a hard one. Years ago, when I saw Vitagraph's The Christian with Earl Williams and Edith Story, I said that this was the greatest yet done, and I stuck to this for several years. Although Vitagraph did another and shorter play, which I still think should rank among the greatest, The Battle Hymn of the Republic. Later, when I saw Cabiria, Civilization, and The Birth of a Nation, I thought these were the greatest, although they really come under the head of photo spectacles. Leaving out the spectacles, I'm inclined to think that the greatest photodrama is Revelation with Nazimova. Broken Blossoms by Griffith is far greater in several respects, but I am inclined to place the former at the top of the list. As for the greatest farce, I think I would name Chaplin's Shoulder Arms. For the greatest comedy, I think I would name Mary Pickford's Daddy Longlegs. I would like to name several other pictures that come to mind as I write, but I fear to name 10. Least I admit 10 others that I will afterwards recall as being equally great. Of this, more anon. The suffragette beams on me and inquires if I believe in clubs for women. Well, now, it depends upon the kind of clubs. Maurice G. Lane of Detroit wants to know how actresses keep their eyes open for a minute or more without tears. It is simply a matter of practice. Have you ever seen those fellows in the shop windows dressed up to look like wax figures? By long practice, these people can stand in a certain posture for many minutes at a time without a single blink and without a single perceptible movement of the chest. I don't think it will do you any harm to try to keep from winking, but it certainly will not do your eyes any good. But if you must wink, wink both eyes. Waco Forrest of Zeus, Virginia, wants to know what's the most coveted pedestal of a movie actress. I am sure I don't know, unless it be her understanding, in other words, her legs. Whether her greatest ambition is fame, fortune, or glory, I don't know, because they all differ. I fear, however, that many of them think more highly of a shapely ankle and a well-modeled face than they do of a good heart and home. You are wrong, TJB, about Solomon's wisdom. Undoubtedly, the reason that Solomon was so wise was that he had 700 wives to consult, whilst I have none. Why not invent a class of critics who can see the good as well as the bad? There is some good in everything and in everybody, but the critics seldom see it, for like flies, they pass over our good parts and light only on our sores. The critic creates discouragement when what we need most, perhaps, is encouragement. It is important enough to learn our faults, but it's just as important to learn our merits. So let us boost more and knock less. Of course, I think motion pictures are a permanent institution. Nearly 1,000 years, the drama has been to the world one of its chief sources of entertainment, culture, and education. Motion pictures began its career only 10 or 15 years ago, and even now it shows signs of competing with the drama. The motion picture is a mirror in which we see vice in its hideousness and virtue in all its purity, and we learn to despise the one and to adore the other. On the Greek stage, a drama consists in reality of 3 dramas, called a trilogy, and was performed consecutively in the course of one day. The moving picture play performs the same thing in 1 hour. The greatest product of creation is the woman with beauty, brains, and virtue. The only trouble is, the Creator never made one. My young friend from Syracuse is quite right, but there is such a thing as carrying economy too far, which recalls the following lines which I find in my notebook. He never took a day of rest. He couldn't afford it. He never had his trousers pressed. He couldn't afford it. He never went away carefree to visit distant lands to see how fair a place this world might be. He couldn't afford it. He never went to see a play. He couldn't afford it. He loved for art he put away. He couldn't afford it. He died and left his heirs a lot, but no tall shaft proclaims the spot in which he lies. His children thought they couldn't afford it. As you say, Lazarus, it never rains but it pours, yet every cloud has a silver lining. As the artist and the poet love the storm, so must we learn to love the clouds of life, because they help to make the coming sunshine brighter. A young lady asks if I advise against marriage between persons of unequal age. Well, it is customary for man and wife to be nearly the same age, yet history records many happy marriages to the contrary, among which might be mentioned that of Muhammad, who at 20 married a wife of 40, Shakespeare, who married Anne Hathaway 7 years his senior, Dr. Johnson, who married a lady twice his own age, Howard, the philanthropist, who at the age of 25 selected a wife of 42. Mrs. Rowe, the author, was 15 years the senior of her husband. Margaret Fuller, who married Count d'Ossoli, 10 years her junior, and Jenny Lind, who was 10 years older than her Otto Goldschmidt. If 2 persons really love each other, it matters little about their ages, so long as they enjoy each other's companionship. An old man of the library might prove a burden for a young wife who loves society, the theater, admiration, and dress, and so might an elderly matron of the household prove uncongenial to a young man who loved the outside world more than his home. But given 2 persons with similar taste and plenty of admiration for each other, they usually get along splendidly, even if there is a wide difference in their ages. To do a mean thing is bad, but to keep on doing it is wicked. It is easier to quench a spark than a fire, so stop, now. I'm sure I don't know what would become of the Kaiser, since he is Wilhelm II. If history repeats itself, he will have a sad fate. Nearly all the seconds in history were treated pretty rough, among the unfortunates being Alexander II of Russia, Edward II of England, Napoleon II of France, Richard II of England, James II of England, Abdul Hamid II of Turkey, Nicholas II of Russia, William II of England, William II of Holland, William II of the Netherlands, Henry II of France, Henry II of England, Ludwig II of Bavaria, Louis II of France, and Louis II of Hungary. I don't care what they do with Kaiser Wilhelm II, so long as they do it quick and put him in a safe place until his creator calls him to a hotter one. To see faces of common people in the street has always been one of my greatest pleasures. I'm convinced that we not only love ourselves and others, but that we also hate ourselves and others. In every man there's a little of all men. It is a fact that there are many people who read merely that they need not think, but I hope you are not one of that kind, my dear Antonio. Truth is informed that the sage doesn't pretend to keep track of the marriages and divorces in the profession. When last I saw J. Warren Kerrigan, he was not married, and therefore I can't tell you whether he is married to Lois Wilson and has 2 children, as you say. I understand that the greatest living authority on such matters is the answer man of the Motion Picture Magazine, so you had better consult him. Also, I don't wish to go on record as stating why Owen Moore doesn't live with his wife, Mary Pickford. Common sense would suggest, however, that it is quite impossible for them to be together all the time, even if they wanted to, since they always play in different companies and usually in different parts of the country. As for the unpopularity of Jess Willard, I think you are correctly informed because he was never very popular and is, of course, less so now than ever. He reminds me of a big stuffed pig, stuffed mostly with conceit and overconfidence. It is well that Jack the Giant Killer knocked the stuffing out of him, because now we shall have a real champion and a popular one. Beasts have passions, humans have reasons, but since we are human beasts, we must keep our passions within reason. The chief cause of laughter, paradoxical as it may seem, is our love of order, beauty, and consistency. We laugh only when the law of order, or of beauty, or of consistency, has been violated. The sources of all merriment are in the cordial sympathies of our nature. Laughter is a near relative of the highest and most instinctive wisdom, being brother to judgment and imagination. Hearty laughter is a sure sign of a healthy nature for both thinking and acting, in spite of the fact that idiots laugh. Surprise or incongruity lie at the bottom of laughter. Human deformity would be ludicrous were it not for sympathy and humanity. When young, we have all we can do to keep from laughing when we shouldn't. When old, we have all we can do to laugh when we should. It is not too early to repeat the old saying, Christmas is coming. Now is just about the time to begin making preparations. Most people wait until the middle of December, and thus double their expenses and trouble, and the expenses and trouble of everybody else. A moment's thought will convince anybody that the prices of holiday goods are greatly in excess of the prices of the same articles at other seasons. A large part of the so-called holiday goods are merely veneer and tinsel and of only temporary utility. The manufacturers make up holiday articles to catch the eye more than for permanent use. Especially this is true of such things as toys, dolls, frames, desk articles, and ornaments, particularly those that sell for $1 or less. Standard staple articles, such as are sold the year round, are always more reliable than those that are made up for the holiday trade, and the prices are more reasonable. Large profits are expected on holiday goods. Furthermore, we are all excited during the holiday season, and we flit hither and thither wondering what we should buy for this one and that, and the crowds only add to our bewilderment. Perhaps some of us even let the grocer and the butcher bills go for another month, so as to have plenty to spend on presents, whereas if we should begin buying now, we would not feel the strain on our wallets. Again, the clerks and shop girls are sadly overworked during the holiday season, and they have not the time nor the patience to treat us as they do now. It is not fair to them, nor to the horses and drivers who pounce upon them as we do, all in a week or two. The best plan is this: write down a list of all those whom you wish to make presents, and from time to time set opposite their names several articles which you think would be appropriate to give them. The next time you are out shopping, look around all the stores, buy what you want, assign it to the favored one on the list, and then set your mind on completing the list on subsequent shopping tours. In this way you will have ended a hard task by December 1st and will have saved a lot of time, money, energy, and worry. It is more blessed to give than to receive. My address is 177 Duffield Street, Brooklyn, New York. So you think I am insane? Thanks immensely. Pascal, Socrates, Schopenhauer, Auguste Comte, Descartes, Leibniz, Tolstoy, Rousseau, Victor Hugo, Balzac, Edgar Allan Poe, Shakespeare, Goethe, De Quincey, Byron, Coleridge, Cowper, Dante, Dickens, Carlyle, Ruskin, Darwin, and Sir Isaac Newton have all been put down by the learned brain specialists as insane. unsane or semi-insane, and have been declared by the Holy Order of Science to be demi-Faust, clinically psychopathic, morally paralytic, or philosophically deformed, and to have been afflicted with veritable disease of the ego, the maniacal phase of circular insanity, chronic neurasthenia, paranoia, or some other form of psychic disorder bordering on madness. In other words, anybody who accomplishes something worthwhile is insane, and so, my dear philosopher, I feel I must have made an impression on you. Thanks. I will answer you, Mrs. M., the best I can, but briefly. The will to survive is at the bottom of everything. Education, intelligence, the desire for power, and a desire to appear superior to our fellows are simply manifestations of that will to survive under more favorable conditions than they. As we become more civilized, we begin to look on our fellows less and less as rivals and more as brothers. And here lies the true test of civilization. The selfish man is the not yet civilized man. It is this altruism that civilizes him. The history of primitive man proves all this. The first impulse of man was to save himself. The second was to save his family. The third, to save his fellows. Not until he's able to say, "The world is my country, all mankind, my countrymen," is he thoroughly civilized. The doctrine of patriotism, in which a man loves his own flock only and hates all others, is evidence of only partial civilization, all of which, if true, proves that Germany has never yet been a civilized nation. Another evolution fanatic persists in trying to draw me out again on this very dry topic. According to evolutionary philosophy, there are three great processes of all true development as follows: aggregation, or the massing of things; differentiation, or the varying of things; and integration, or the reuniting of things into higher wholes. From a careful study of this one phenomenon, science could almost decide that progress was the object of nature and that altruism was the object of progress. Why was the long, cruel, unloving process of evolution chosen, when it must have been foreseen that man was eventually to take the reins in hand and complete the work? It has taken hundreds of thousands of years to evolve man, and although he is now physically complete, bodily development having been arrested, the relentless struggle goes on, and man unwittingly becomes the executioner in the tyrannic trial of survival of the fittest. Says Lucretia, eyes were not made to see with, but being formed by a fortuitous concurrence of atoms, sight followed by an unforeseen accident. If eyes were made to see, seeing must have existed before eyes. If it did not, why eyes? And if seeing did not exist before eyes, how could eyes be made for that which is not for nothing? Viva la logique! My observation has been that the highest type of intellectual people attend grand opera and the drama when plays by such as Shakespeare, Ibsen, Goldsmith, Sheridan, and Bernard Shaw are presented. In the next class below is the type of less intellectual people who like the modern plays with morals and problem plays. In the next class below is the type who likes vaudeville. In the next lower class is the type who prefers musical comedies. In the bottom class is the type who want burlesque, commonly called leg shows. There is no set rule about this, for there are too many exceptions, but each class is sufficiently peopled to cause the writing of this paragraph in answer to an inquiry. You seldom find a person who likes Shakespearean plays and musical comedies also, and you seldom find a person who likes cheap burlesque and grand opera. Here's a quotation, and if you don't know the author and try to guess, you would not get it right in 1,000 guesses. Who loves not wine, women, and song remains a fool all his life long. The author is none other than Martin Luther. The Sage. End of section 18.
Section 19 of Shadowland, October 1919. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. There was a movie Ero and he had, by G.H. Read by Alan Mapstone. There was a movie Ero, and he had a Greek god torso and a Brinkley face, 10 cars, a wife, a sweetheart, and a child, 4 million fans, some scandal, curly hair, I love you eyes. Now did you ever hear the like o' that? End of section 19. End of Shadowland, October 1919, by Various.